Volya Radio. Slava Ukraini!
This is Volya Radio. It is October 19th, 10 a.m. Eastern, and we are going to be running a bit of a unique segment that we haven't done just yet. We're going to let the space populate a little bit, but today we're going to be covering the Ukrainian Air Force and a lot of the information and news that has come out in the past few weeks, past few months, stuff that hasn't been covered yet as much in the space. So we've got ZGoalman, HopC coming up, a couple others who may pop in, and then Shaggy and myself. HopC, welcome up.
Hey there. It's good to hear your voice.
You too, sir. You too. I did throw up into the nest a video of a Mi-24 taking out a Shahed drone. I'm not sure when that was from, if that's from today or just recently, but pretty cool video.
I saw that. I love the repurposing of something that's probably not survivable or super survivable in the forward air edge of the battle area, and finding a new use for it. Heinz and Z can speak to this better than I can, but they're known to be a pretty speedy helicopter.
So, go ahead, Z.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Hop's right. It's got enough speed. It's just got to get him up and get in range. I guess it shot it down with its gun. Is that what it did? I didn't see it.
Yeah.
Forrest, there's no contrail. It's pretty obvious it was a gun kill. Just depends on which type of gun, depending on variant, doesn't matter. But anyways, this kind of leads us to talking about drones later, which hopefully I can contribute with. I'm a little busy right now. I'll be right back.
Yeah, cheers, Latin. Right, we've got everyone up for us, Forrest. I'm busy putting a few things in the nest as well. The second tweet in the nest, the middle one, is our space. So if people want to retweet that out, that would be awesome. And if you want to volunteer for Volya Radio, then the latest tweet in the nest is our volunteer application form. You can fill out. Just that, Forrest. Back to you.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, make sure if you are interested, fill out that form. We are just getting ourselves situated. It was kind of a quick process, and so we are still working through the processes. But I know we have an HR department who's going to be working on onboarding people hopefully soon. I believe that should be happening now. So if you did fill it out, keep your eye out for it. So, well, this segment, it was inspired by a former segment of a different space, and I got a lot of questions often about when are we going to do insert name again. And the first thing I tried to do once we got our feet settled was try and set this back up, because I missed the air updates. I don't have nearly the knowledge base that the gentlemen that are in this speaker panel with me. So I am so excited about today, and I'm ready to get started if you guys are. And kind of wanted to hit just a basic overview of where the Ukrainian Air Force is today, what their main mission set is, what are the things they're doing the most, maybe what challenges is Russia providing them with, and just kind of hit a 30,000 foot before we get started into too much detail. Yeah, Latin.
If it's okay, I'll go first because I'm going to be driving in a few minutes. I think I've done a lot of thinking about this in the last few days, really done a deep dive to try to wrap my head around because a lot of questions I was asking about, like you said, where are they really at? What are they accomplishing? What are the Russians accomplishing? I think that there's a couple of things, particularly when maybe we can, draw this out in the discussion, but what the F-16s are actually doing right now. We've gotten news of continued deliveries. where it looks like it's possible they'll have 2 squadrons operational by the end of the year. We need to talk about what that looks like. What is it they're going to be able to actually, what are they actually accomplishing with it right now? I think it might be a little more than we might have assumed. And then on the Russian side, I think the glide bombs continue to be they're the elephant in the room, I think, when it comes to the current air war. And what are they actually accomplishing with it? I had fears, a lot of people had big fears about where this could go earlier in the year. And where we are right now is, although there's still a very dark side to it, it may not be the worst case scenario. So I'll just throw those 2 thoughts out there for now.
All right, cool. Thank you, Latin. If you could, when you say things like squadron, just do it once and just say how many's in a squadron and things like that, just for those non-airy people.
Yeah, for a Ukrainian squadron, you're talking about 12 operational aircraft. I'm assuming there would be a few spares as well as part of that. Aircraft, as they're rotated through maintenance to maintain the operational force, but it's 12. So you're talking about 24. All of the numbers that we've seen now, we saw an announcement from the Netherlands, and then we saw an announcement from Norway 1 or 2 days ago. Everything seems to point to the Ukrainians being able to, assuming they have the crews for them, and there's a lot of movement happening in training. I've been getting a lot of information on what Greece is doing now. Ukrainian media has been reporting on that over the last 24 hours. It really is a coalition that's working. Whether it's doing enough, that's another issue, but it is a coalition. And I think that 2 operational squadrons by the end of the year, by this dark, difficult winter that's headed for Ukraine, is going to really help their air defense situation. And again, we can break that down a little bit later about what that really looks like.
Are you good, Forrest? Oh, there you are.
Yeah, that's outstanding, considering where things were even 6 months ago, to have 2 full squadrons. Do you know if pilot training, do we have any updates? You said you might have some. Last I heard, there weren't too many F-16 pilots just yet. Have there been more graduation classes?
Like specific numbers of pilots that are graduating, and remember, there's 2 types of graduation that you might be looking at, or 2 cohorts. Really, is the experienced pilots coming from the Ukrainian fighter community that are transitioning to F-16, and then essentially the pilot cadets that are coming out of initial stages of flight training in Ukraine, and then they're farmed out to partner nations, and they would be flying. They're not going to F-16 transition yet, right? That's an earlier stage. Exact numbers, I don't know. We've seen some images of some of these young men graduating, but that's just an ongoing thing. I think it's the best thing we can say. It's ongoing. Greece appears to be really stepping up more recently to contribute to this. And just one other thing, that there's the 12, the 2 squadrons potentially operational by the end of the year. But also add to that the Mirage 2000s, which will be, I think, at least 1 squadron that we're being told by the French now, early 2025. So still could be arriving at a critical time to help take on the cruise missile and drone threat, which I think that's really where, I'll just take a minute here because we're leaving in a minute, but this is where I think the F-16s and then eventually the 2000s, the Mirage 2000s, will be able to what is it they're really doing right now? We know the F-16 has a huge potential of roles which have not even begun to be fully utilized by the Ukrainians. Eventually, over time, as it matures in Ukrainian service, that will happen. I always said, many of us said, that the priority tasking would be air-to-air, and in particular, work against cruise missiles and drones, unless the aircraft had been upgraded to allow them to have the reach to reach the aircraft, the Russian aircraft carrying glide bombs. That appears to not have happened as of yet. But I don't think we should underestimate the value of the anti-drone and cruise missile work that they're doing on a nightly basis. Mostly looks like night work, maybe some during the day, but I got the impression that the legacy fighter forces and probably the F-16s as well are doing a lot of this at night. That takes a lot of pressure off the ground-based air defense. That's in a way a force multiplier for the ground-based air defense for systems like IRIS-T and Patriot that can be used against the smaller in number but more dangerous targets like ballistic missiles. And that can't be underestimated, because one of the things that we always knew that the F-16s were not going to be a game changer, but what they were going to be and will continue to be with increasing numbers is an important strengthening of Ukraine's air defense. And I think taking that pressure off of the ground-based air defense is going to be something that's really going to save a lot of lives in this coming winter.
Yes, thank you. Go ahead, Hop.
Yeah, I'm sort of adding on to some of the stuff that Latin had, and I don't want to take away from his time, but we'll circle back around and talk about how the pilot training pipelines and it are evolving, and it's important that we keep the emphasizing the plural side of that. But Latin, before I lose you, um, for however long it is, have we seen evidence of Greek Mirage 2000
I just lost Hop.
2005s? Oh, am I still here?
I
Yeah.
still have them. Latin, you might need
Okay.
to recycle.
I
for
got
me.
you. I got you now, Hop. I got you now.
Okay. I was asking if we had seen any evidence of a Greek training pipeline for the 2005s, the Mirage 2005s. I got to come up with a better way of talking about them. Or is that all French?
Well,
the training pipeline.
this is where it gets really interesting, because I've just picked up on some information this morning, and I was talking to our old friend Furious George, who is obviously really dialed into the Greek side of aid to Ukraine, and apparently there's ongoing training in two bases in Greece that involve F-16 Mirage 2000 and Rafale.
Thanks for that.
And of course,
We'll circle back around.
no, Hop, and sorry, I didn't mean to suggest there that Ukraine is getting Rafales. I think Ukraine will get Rafales someday. If they're already operating French aircraft, it's a no-brainer. They will eventually operate Rafale. But the fact, and I'm not trying to suggest, I'm not trying to put any misinformation out there that they are in any way undergoing Rafale conversion or anything like that. But it makes sense to me that if Ukrainian pilots were in Greece and focusing on the aircraft they will be getting, and they see those Rafales, they have this relationship with France now, it just seems like a no-brainer that they would be having a look at them the way they were looking at Gripen more than a year ago.
Absolutely. Then it's going to head down to sort of an economic competition, and which will be largely driven, well, not largely driven, but dependent upon whoever has the seat of power in both France and the U.S. and the focus on basically competing aircraft industries that are operating within the same command framework, which is to say the West.
Thank you. I didn't know if Latin was going to come back on that or not. ZGoalman, do you want to jump in as to kind of this overview of where we're at, where the Ukrainian Air Force is at?
Yeah, I don't have really much more to add. It's a slog, a slow slog. They're getting aircraft. You got to start before you finish, and I think the mission set that they're running are what kind of we all expected. They're going to come out slow, and they'll build their force, continue their training, and then once they get to two squadrons, and then maybe a third of the Mirage, then we may see some more aggressive type of of a role for them. But I think mostly cruise missile defense, combat air patrols is what we can expect from the Air Force at this point.
Go ahead, Hop.
Yeah, sort of to build on what Z's saying. I think your mission set, because we still really have a small number of F-16s. We don't have any Mirage 2000s in the inventory yet. The Ukrainian inventory. The Rand Corporation and some other studies have shown that there seems to be a bias towards defensive operations with these jets to basically protect the power and light and heating infrastructure that the Russians so like to attack starting about this time of year. and they started in the proverbial October, November, December timeframe because you can't repair it quickly enough. Whereas in the past, they've made the mistake sometimes of attacking these things, the mistake from a Russian point of view, early enough that some of it can be brought in like the summer and things like that, that it can be brought up online. You're going to see, and as Latin had indicated, and I think this will continue, a use of F-16s and legacy fighters. That's to say the C-27s, the MiG-29s, operating at night, trying at a time when other weapon systems become less effective. We've just seen an example of a Hind shooting down a Shahed. If we're seeing a picture of it, it's been happening for a while. Those are weapon systems that probably need to operate during the day. They might have some IR ability to track, but basically they're going to be using the old Mod 1 Mark 0 eyeballs to find and to localize and attack the Shaheeds. So your fighters, because of the limited numbers available to them, are going to be air defense mostly, and precluding the offensive side of things. During the mud season, you're probably not going to see them being used a lot, and and uh, and as much as we would all love to see the F-16s, in particular, used against the glide bomb threat, people have to realize that when you look at an area that's being bombed, it's got different lines on either side of it, for both sides. You have the MEZ, the missile engagement zone, which will those two zones will overlap for both the Ukrainians and the Russians, which means that when you fly a fixed wing aircraft into your enemy's MEZ, the risk for shoot down is there. Unfortunately, the Ukrainian MEZ doesn't extend that far into the area, far enough really into the areas where the glide bombs are being released from, to put their airframes, the Su-35s, which I think are or is it the 34s, primarily dropping a lot of these glide bombs. Uh, those MEZs aren't a big threat. On the other hand, if you're going to run an F-16 up to the edge of your enemy's, the Russians' MEZ, and try and launch, it's there's a lot of issues there. There's the threat, obviously, of being shot down, but there's the weapons envelopes you have to think of, and with the AMRAAM 120s, uh, that even with the extended range ones, the 110 kilometers, say, range. If the Russians sense a missile launch, even at the very edge of those parameters, all they have to do is turn and run away, and the envelope basically evaporates. And even if there's been a missile launch, the threat to the Russian aircraft is minimal or non-existent, and then all they have to do is turn back around and go back through their mission platform, and eventually either the F-16 or the threatening aircraft is going to be under threat of being shot down or run out of fuel. So as you can see, this is, the Russians have the advantage here until we get something longer range or more of them, or develop some kind of trickery, and that doesn't even address the AWACS Link 16 issues that would come from trying to control this kind of an environment. I kind of rambled there a little bit, but I wanted to get that stuff out.
Yeah, you mentioned, I'll jump in here. You mentioned something I was going to bring up. To me, the next big event, and before you really see any real offensive action from F-16s, would be when you start seeing the Saab 3400, early warning aircraft. If once Ukraine gets them, then to me that's the thing that makes the F-16 a force multiplier that can reduce the risk of putting it at risk being in an offensive role, and they can start setting traps and things of that sort. So that's kind of the next event I'm looking for as Ukraine builds their Air Force, their fighter Air Force. That's kind of like chopping wood. You just keep going, you keep adding. But the real discriminator, in my mind, will be when they get those AW and C aircraft from Sweden. I guess they're going to get it coming from Sweden, and presumably they're equipped with data link like Link 16 or Link 16 itself.
Before I jump over to HopC, do we have any ideas to what the timeline there was? I was under the impression a while ago that it was already happening.
Yeah, I don't know that, and I haven't seen any information. It would probably be out there if they were in theater, or so. It's hard, they're hard to hide.
Yeah, I think Z's right. They're not not in theater. They would be hard to hide. There would be changes in the op tempo, as he indicated. As soon as those sort of become available to the Ukrainians, they suddenly have an indigenous, airborne AWACS capability. Whereas now they're reliant very much on AWACS operating on the edge of NATO airspace and maybe to a small degree down in the southwestern corners of the Black Sea, yeah, the Black Sea, and these, while they have some reach, and are matched up with some of our satellite overhead radar capabilities, it won't be the same, and they are from everything I've seen Link 16 capable, and the Mirages are Link 16 capable, and of course the F-16s are Link 16 capable. And when Z was talking about traps being set, ops patterns being recognized by the Russian, that the Russians are operating through and with, because some of that stuff can't be modified depending on if it's if it's ground attack on demand from the from the Russian ground troops requesting air support. I don't know if they're capable of that, but there's going to be some sort of a schedule operating that the Ukrainians have probably already recognized just through their air defense radars that are ground based. But this will allow them, when they finally get the SOBs, to jump on that. The question about how long it takes to train people in that, this is, and we talked about this a little bit in the back channels. I mean, the guys in the back operating the actual radars and the tactical coordinators that are looking over the sensor operators, that's a dark art that takes a long time to develop. Months and months and months of training, because you have to be super agile while you're doing this. The Ukrainian air defense picture is probably incredibly dense, with lots of moving parts, helicopters popping up here and there, lots of potential for blue on blue engagements, lots of issues with force separation and no-fly zones internal to the country because of air defense alert levels, and on and on and on. And mistakes will be made. The guys in the front just flying the airplane around, that training's pretty simple, and you could basically take any Ukrainian transport qualified pilot that was flying around AN whatevers, multi-engine turboprops, give them a little bit of differences training, and probably in 90 days you could crank out a set of fully qualified pilots for that side of the mission. But the meat of the issue is back in the tube, and it's going to take a while for those guys to build competency on this new system, even if they're taking, for example, guys that used to operate ground-based radars and teaching them how to use that. It's going to take a while, and then when they come out, they're not going to be as good in their first few months as they will be 90 days, 120 days into doing the mission. And then again, I believe they're only going to get 4 of these things, Z, or Primus, do you guys remember? But that's
Two at the moment. They need 4, but they're only
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I thought. So it's going to take a long time for them to be fully up and operational. The good news is, for me, and this is opinion, not fact, but it sort of bears out. I'm sure these people are in the process of being trained, because a lot of that tube training can be done on the simulator level, and ratcheting up the intensity so they can develop into the high acuity operators that they need to be. Thanks.
And they could be running real live sims of real operational happenings, because the Western aircraft that are monitoring, they could just backplay that through their sims to see how it actually looks in real time.
Absolutely. Simulator technology is pretty amazing, especially for these kinds of activities. People can build experience at a high rate, and get that competency and those light hands on the consoles that they need in order to. There's a whole process. These people get a screen in front of them. They have to identify, designate, and determine which targets are real that they want to track, and which are a flock of birds, and which are friendly, and which are not friendly, and keeping up on the symbology and the track. At the same time, communicating this with the guys to your left and to your right, and to the tactical coordinator, so they can decide what to put out onto the link. It's a multi-layered evolution that is, for the entire time they're airborne, especially because they'll be taking off inside the battle zone and landing inside the battle zone. It's exhausting, and these planes aren't designed to have onboard relief, as far as I know. So you're gonna, if they run a 4 or 6 hour mission, it'll be a very intense, fatiguing event for the people back in the tube, and they will learn quickly.
Yeah,
And that's why I said they need 4, at least 4, to have 24-hour coverage. Right. That's so the Russians will be able to monitor when these things go airborne, because there will be downtimes, and they can, that's intelligence that they will have to kind of know when the threat environment is increased for them. So without 24-hour coverage, the Russians do get a clue when they can diminish that threat, at least.
yeah. Thank you, gentlemen.
Forrest, can I just chime in for a sec?
Yeah, do it. You guys can talk, and I'll just stay on the background. Go ahead.
I'll talk when I can. Just adding to what Hop was saying, that I would really emphasize that for all of that nuance that you were describing, Hop, in addition to that, we just have to consider that for the Ukrainians, AEW is a completely new trade for them. They're coming from zero. They've never operated that kind of platform. Some of their people, maybe they might have some older guys that had some experience with early stages of the Russian program back in the day, but that would be about the only connection I could think of. Otherwise, they're starting from zero.
I think they got agreement. Real quick, I do want to take a moment to ask everyone to share out the space. Our numbers had been climbing up. They've kind of stagnated a bit. If you haven't retweeted the space, that would be helpful to get more people in here. This is certainly a segment that people like. So, did Primus fall off? It looks like he did.
I think he
Primus
did. Yeah,
is
I
up
looked.
here.
Yeah, he's not on my screen either. He's gone into the warp.
All right. Latin, if you're still with us, I know you wanted to talk about drones a little bit, and what drone warfare looks like for the rest of the year. We've covered drones pretty well on Volya so far, but what changes do we see coming down the pipeline for drones, other than that easy? We've seen Yaks shooting them out of the air. We've now seen the Mi-24 shooting them out of the air. What other new things besides the F-16s can we expect with the drone warfare?
Well, I'd say the Mirage 2000s could be part of this, but there's also indications that the Mirage 2000s might be actually, they might prioritize an air-to-ground tasking because they can carry they're being modified for air-to-ground ordnance. We're assuming that's probably the French AASM that the Ukrainians are already using with their legacy Soviet aircraft. So yeah, I mean, the Mirage 2000, especially in the limited numbers that they're going to be getting initially, I think there will be more eventually in 2025, but we'll see. But with the initial numbers, they could contribute to that work against drones and cruise missiles. On the ground side, just anytime you hear an additional ground-based air defense system being provided by the West, and that's kind of a trickle here and there, we hear an announcement, that all contributes to it. I really think the big increase in their capability is the F-16s. And remember that an IRIS-T being used against a drone is a lot more expensive than a Sidewinder. And we've seen the Israelis recently using F-15s against drones, using the firing Sparrows, which is an earlier generation of American beyond visual range missile. There's no indication. I don't think. Well, though they have actually received Sparrows for ground launch. Anyways, it's possible they could use them on F-16. Some F-16 variants can carry Sparrow. The bottom line is that the air-to-air weaponry that the F-16 is capable of carrying is plentiful and relatively cheap compared to the missile interceptors of an IRIS-T system or Patriot. And that's where I really think that with every additional F-16 that arrives, that's the biggest contribution they can make to this conflict, to the air war, to the air defense of Ukraine. And yeah, that's it. That's my thought for now.
ZGoalman, Hop, any of you want to jump in there?
Sure, I'll jump in real quickly, and then I want to flip to Primus before we lose him again. I mean, the cost of the most expensive Sidewinder, and this is older information, but it's about $650,000. Okay, it's a very expensive missile, but compared to even an AMRAAM is, I think, 1.3 million, and an IRIS-T. I mean, I don't even know. I assume it's the cost of an AMRAAM or more. So, you have to look at if they're shooting down, the proverbial Shaheed, which was made maybe for $50,000. You can't think of it in terms of 650 versus 50,000. It's what the cost of fixing the damage, and of course you can't put a price on human life that the Shaheed potentially is going to do, and therefore the IR missiles of the world, the Sidewinders, the Alamos that are carried by the legacy Soviet jets that the Ukrainians fly, are in air quotes less expensive and probably just about as effective in going up against the drone cruise missile air threat.
Thank you. That sounds good. Let's pop over to Primus real quick.
Thank you, Forrest. Good to see you. Missed you this Thursday. So,
Yeah, it's weird.
All right. So we'll got a couple ideas to talk to you about with that. But for the brain trust that we have here, and it's so good having a kind of a scheduled air power airspace here. That's what we call it, airspace. That could be fun. Question is with the Swedish Saab airborne warning early control, or AWACS. It's not really an AWACS, but similar thing. Planes, how survivable are these things really going to be? Are they going to be able to get close enough to the battle that they're not going to be at risk? When you have things like the Russians had the AA-13 axe heads with just a whopping range on there, they're also going to be operating fairly, I would assume, close to the envelopes of like the S-400s and so on out there. Are they going to be able to get close enough to the battlefield without taking a risk? I'm concerned of how survivable these planes actually are going to be when the Russians have these very long-range missiles, which, an airborne, platform like that is going to have to kind of operate at high altitude. At least that's my understanding of it to be effective. And that's kind of the envelope that's been kind of denied up until this point. And I have a hard time seeing a turboprop flying around at 30,000 feet when fighter planes can't do it.
Yeah, I think there's an envelope for them to fly that and be effective. So they're they're trying to reach the front line. Russia with their A-50s were trying to reach way behind the line. That's what made them vulnerable. So there's an envelope. There's clearly an envelope in the Poland border area. That area where they will be able to fly at an altitude in order to be effective. And this is just my estimation. That will make them effective, and not put them in harm's way. That's my opinion. We'll see. If they get enough altitude, then they should be able to see far enough to be effective and see, these glide bombs coming in. They can see them when they're coming in, and be able to set up traps. And again, like Hop said, if they run they're launching so many of these glide bombs that just deconfliction of their own airspace on the Russian side means they have to be on a kind of a regular schedule because they're dropping so many of them. So I think that that's kind of the thing that allows Ukraine to really make hay with those aircraft, right? That's assuming that the U.S. allows Ukraine to use AMRAAMs to shoot them down over Russian airspace, which frankly I don't know whether that'll happen. So the battle in the north may not be affected as much as with the airborne early warning, but the battle in the east certainly will. Jump in, Hop.
Yeah, they cannot. Would they be at zero risk? Absolutely not. But frankly, they're more risk when they're on the ground than when they're in the air, because they have a lot of options, and they can, There are escape maneuvers that basically involve running away bravely. There's risk inherent for the Russians should they try and go after them. The air-to-air threat for these systems it exists, but it's not the primary threat. The primary threat would be from a ground-based air defense system that is snuck up closer to the line of engagement in order to extend their missile engagement zone deeper into Ukrainian territory. That radar, the radar and that battery would have a very short lifespan if it was brought in that close. Not through probably fixed wing intervention, although it would be nice to eventually develop some sort of a wild weasel sort of Operation Bolo trapping scenario. But really, if they were to bring an S-400 close enough to the forward lines where the missile engagement zone extended deeply into Ukrainian airspace at the kind of distances that the Sobs would have some efficacy as far as looking into Russian airspace and coordinating activity on the other side of into what is Russian controlled airspace. If you bring a missile battery up that far forward, it's not going to survive very long, based on sort of the Ukrainians' ability to detect and bring in even just drone threats, and of course they would have a multi-layered response, probably pre-coordinated and ready to go for when they first bring these the 340s into the battle environment. I hope that helps a little.
Yeah, it does. I mean, with some of the ranges of some of these missiles, I mean, you're right. I mean, it's certainly there's risk involved in this. In some ways, maybe more risk involved. So I mean, I don't see them really hanging out and loitering in a particular place, like on station. But maybe just like showing up and turning on the radar for a few minutes or something like that, or a half hour to coordinate a particular op, and then just going dark again. You know, I mean, they're going to have to be awfully clever with them. Is my point.
Yeah, the other, I agree. It's not, like Hop said, it's not without
I agree.
risk.
Yeah. But I mean, the Ukrainians have shown a willingness to take some risks because of the existential threat they're under. Admittedly, they're currently, I would think, husbanding their F-16s and using them. I wouldn't say sparingly, but cautiously, cautious aggression. And I think the pairing, the natural wine and cheese pairing that goes with the F-16s and the 340s, and eventually the Mirages, will expand the tactical problems for the Russians. They have a finite number of missile systems, and even with long engagement ranges on some of their airborne systems, they're going to be engaging these aircraft at pretty much the if you're trying to engage the 340 with a missile system that has a, let's say, a 250 nautical mile range, that time of flight's pretty long. And if the Ukrainians are able to effectively detect the launches, that gives them a fair amount of time to turn tail and run away. Now, 250 nautical miles, if that's your actual threat envelope, it would be a little bit shorter because that's launching under optimum conditions. But that would limit the distance that the Saabs are able to look into Russian airspace, but that can be beaten down too. It's a chess match. There's a lot of push me, pull you going on, and the Russians, they're down to this number I think is more from June, but say 650 combat tactical aircraft. They seem to be willing to lose them, but there is a number that they don't want to go below because, as we all know, Russia is a massive country that has very low production rates on their aircraft. So they can't they act like they're willing to risk them, but ultimately there's a number that they're not willing to go below.
One other quick question on here with AWACS radars or early warning radars like that. How well do they do looking upwards? Like if you wanted to fly one of those Saabs at low to medium altitude and just look upwards rather than flying like really high and looking down or parallel, how well would that actually work?
Well, that is a great question that I don't have the answer off the top of my head, other than sort of a basic understanding of radar. But let's not forget that these airborne early radars, and I think Gunny's out there lurking around somewhere. And here's a man that knows how surface-based radar or radar looking up works. I would, and if we could coax him into coming up and maybe answering that question or sending somebody a DM in the background. That would be appreciated, because I don't really know the answer of how well they do going up. But radar doesn't really care about what direction you're looking. It only cares about the curvature of the earth and ground-based interference and things like that. That much I know from my very rudimentary understanding.
Flexicom, do you have a question?
Yes, thank you. I have two, actually. One quick one, thinking about needing at least 4 and probably more than that AWACS to maintain surveillance. I guess I just briefly thought the Russians are not bombing 24 hours a day. Well, they could be, but I mean, there seems to be a bit of a pattern, and they like hitting people at night. So that might decrease the length of time you always have to survey. My other question was back to when we first saw what was possibly an F-16 kill of a Sukhoi 34, I think it was. And I don't know if we ever answered the question, was it really? But I heard on a number of goofy spaces that are around that the Ukrainians do not have the D-Link and 16 or whatever it's called, which I don't really understand at all. But anyway, people were saying absolutely the Ukrainians don't have it, and that was one reason they thought it would be very difficult for an F-16 to take out this Russian plane. So those are my two questions about the AWACS time schedule, 24 hours 7 or not, and yeah, what about that? Did we ever did we ever find out the answer to whether the F-16s had a kill and do they have D-Link? Thanks, guys.
I'll take the first shot at that.
Answer number one
okay,
is the F-16s definitely have the ability to just hardwired into them for Link 16. There pretty much isn't an F-16 out there flying that is any way related to NATO ops that doesn't have Link 16.
I thought they
have
had
not
the
heard-
ability to have it, but that somehow, and I obviously don't understand how it works, but that it hadn't been given to them. So that's what I don't quite understand. They could receive, they could load it in if it was there, or they could use it if it was there, but that Ukraine doesn't have it. That was what people were saying.
Well, I believe that they have some Link 16 capability, and there's numerous signs to me that they do. Well, one, they have and operate Patriot batteries, and Patriot batteries are very dependent upon Link 16 for some of their targeting. We sent over a long time ago, and I can't remember what the acronym for it is, but basically one of our very fancy air combat control nodules, of which only a few exist, and that was sent over probably well over a year or 16 months ago. And a lot of what they do is Link 16 based. Now they definitely have a lot of equipment that doesn't have Link 16 in it. All the legacy Soviet fighters are not Link 16 capable, and it's not worth it, nor are they really able to integrate those with Link 16 or even Link 11 or anything. And as far as the shoot down by an F-16, I haven't seen anything that passes as hard confirmation. If somebody else has seen it out there, I mean, please speak up. And I don't know if you noticed, Forrest, but Gunny, I think, is trying to come up. If you could send him an invite.
Yep, we have him up.
He's here. Hi, well, Gunny.
Yeah, hi, mate. The Link 16 thing, I'm not really buying, but they don't have it. I can't envisage them using Link 11. Link 11's pretty legacy. I don't know how far the iterations went. It was still in use when I went outside. It is sort of it's serviceable, but I don't think even F-16 carries it. So Link 16 would make sense. I think there's a bit of smoke and mirrors going on there, to be honest with you. It would just make no sense to try and run it Link 11. There's no really real reason why they wouldn't run Link 16. I mean, what excuses could you give? Well, the F-16s and the AWACS are going to be operating well behind the forward line of contact. So there's no danger of that kit falling into Russian hands. And we use Link 16 every single day in NATO. So the Russians will have been in a position to try and look at that and pick the signals apart as say, ships are operating on a NATO exercise, something like that. How are they going to use these airborne early warning aircraft? I think they'll keep them well back. I think there's too much of a residual threat from the Russian Air Force. The R-32 and the R-37. We know the R-37 is an operational missile. They were firing, I think, at maximum about 6 per day at the Ukrainian Air Force. It's a hypersonic missile, Mach 6 speed. If you're in a turboprop and you're at 25, 30,000 feet, you're deaded. If they pop one of those, unless you've got some really good ECM equipment on board. So personally, I think they'll keep them back. They can radiate continuously. There's no point having an early warning aircraft up that's flipping its radar on and off. As you know, Hop, you want a RAP, don't you? You want a recognised air picture that's continuous. Floating around at altitude, just flicking your radar on or off is pretty pointless. You need that thing on in order to coordinate your air defences and your fighters to do intercepts. So I think that's my feeling. I think they'll need 4. Looking at the ranges of the radar, 250 nautical miles. So you can pretty much cover most of Ukraine with one on station. But that's not going to include anything coming off Crimea and taking a circular route through the Black Sea. So Raid warning red, I'd probably want 2 up just to cover all the bases. So 4, 3 in rotation, 1 stood down for either emergencies or in maintenance, something like that. But of course, it all depends on what the Russian Air Force are doing. We often overlook, how are they operating? Do they have a CAP, Combat Air Patrol? Where are their CAP stations? How far back from the forward line of contact are they? Do they have an alert procedure? So have they got jets at 5 minutes notice ready to go? Have they managed to regenerate any IL-76 to try and fill the gaps as they keep losing the A-50s? How far back, if they are using AWACS, are they keeping them? Are the CAP stations given a tanker? If they've got a Texaco call sign and they can keep CAP up for 2-3 hours, super. But if not, once they're up on the CAP station, they're going to have to continuously rotate aircraft. That's going to have an impact on maintenance, on pilot fatigue. So there's lots of things I think we don't know about how the Russian Air Force is integrating into the ground control intercept system that we're using. We've got no idea what the real threat is to them radiating on radar on the ground. So we don't know what their radar cover is like. We can say with probably some certainty it's patchy and that they're having a real nightmare with things like missile engagement zones, fighter engagement zones, safe transit corridors, rotating that. And we've seen the AFU, I think, exploit safe transit lanes before to fly an aircraft, do an op, and then fly out again. So, it's really difficult to say, but my gut feeling, given there is still a substantial surface-to-air missile threat, and given that the Russians probably can generate a combat air patrol or get alert jets off the ground fairly quickly, I want those airborne early warning aircraft back. I think they're just too much of a force multiplier to start putting one within 100 miles of the front line. Because the one thing the Russians are fairly competent at is electronic warfare. They know how to do cross-fixing rackets. And once that thing's up, all you need is two sensors. They will work out roughly where that aircraft is operating, and there'll be a pair of MiG-31s or something shooting off. And they'll be popping missiles at them, and they're just going to have to, evade. And for what? There's going to be a lot of time and effort put into training these boys and girls in that aircraft. Don't waste it, I think would be my message. But yeah, Link 11? Nah. I don't think it's good enough. I think we had Link 11 receive only on Shah, on Sea Harriers, late 90s, but it was a little bit jury-rigged. I don't know how far Link 11 went in terms of development before 16, and I think officially its replacement is Link 22, isn't it? Before it started becoming a bit of a legacy system. It's usable. I mean, we managed perfectly well with it. It is encrypted, but it's not what I think the AFU really need. I think as a minimum they'd want 16.
I wanted to add some. I was going to add
Gunny,
something
right.
to.
Link 11 is, the dinosaur age. It's a flip phone, in a smartphone world. It's not really usable. I spent a lot of time using it, and we had a dedicated guy that his primary job over all his other little jobs was to maintain link and coordination. Somebody just DM me. No, I don't hear Z, but I can shut up if he's talking.
Yeah, I just went up and down. Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
You
Yeah,
go ahead.
I was just going to add something to what Lexicon questioned, like the confirmation of the Su-34. The thing that made me skeptical that there was an F-16 kill is because usually, and it's something that actually we just talked about. The Russians have been running caps with their Su-35s when they've been doing their glide bombing. So I wouldn't expect an F-16 to be able to take a kill shot, get close enough to take a kill shot on an Su-34 with an Su-35 in the neighborhood, unless they had a data link. That would be the only, scenario where I think that they would be able to get in position for a kill shot. Since I mean, when they were doing the sand bushes, they were usually taking down Su-35s and Su-34s, which were flying kind of together, with the Su-35s providing coverage, air-to-air coverage for the Su-34. So that made me skeptical that the Su-34 kill was an F-16 kill. I could be wrong. It's just my thought process. That they wouldn't be able to get that kill shot off without the aircraft being put in position to be shot down itself. I just don't think they could get close enough to take that kill shot.
HopC?
Thanks.
100% agree, Z. They're not going, and it kind of feeds into what Gunny was saying. They're not going to, at this point, even really investigate an F-16 going up into that super contested area with low pilot experience, weapons envelope on whichever AMRAAM they have, and not having really great indigenous length 16. I mean, risk factors just ratchet up. It's not a lot of juice for the squeeze, and if they had shot one down with an F-16, I think it would be much more of a trumpeting of that capability by the Ukrainians, even if they weren't planning on using it a lot, just to get in the Russians' head. Flipping back to something that Gunny said, part of the Ukrainian air ops, especially vis-a-vis the drone attacks on more and more distant airfields, and putting the Russian aircraft at risk while they're on the ground and or their support facilities, so it seems to be a very good precursor and setup for, on top of a lot of other things, enhancing the survivability of an AEW aircraft by if you push the transit, you raise the transit time, push the bases farther back, put the Su-35s, the MiG-31s farther away from their home where their weapons and fuel and tech support is, increasing their transit time, less time on station. The further erosion that the Ukrainians are able to do with their drone attacks on airfields is something that it degrades Russian capabilities and enhances, to a degree, the ability to keep those AWACS airborne. With 4 aircraft, I want to emphasize to people, you would not be able to do 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for any amount of time. With 4 airframes and 2 crews per airframe and a spare airframe or an alert airframe, you could probably, assuming that they have about a 6-hour mission, and that air crews have to pre-brief for several hours and debrief for an hour and then go get their rest. I need to get a fresh napkin and do the math on the back of it, but you could probably run 24-hour a day ops for maybe 4 days before the system just sort of broke down due to fatigue and mechanicals and stuff like that. But that being said, if you were running at, say, 18 hours a day and sort of flipping when aircraft are up and when they weren't, you would be able to last a lot longer. The Ukrainian aircraft obviously would have 0 transit time to on station, or close to 0, 30 minutes or something like that, which really enhances the amount of time they have on station and helps with crew fatigue and other things. But really 4 aircraft would be the absolute minimum. You really need more than that. I would love to see them have 6. The Russian capabilities with their AN-50s and the 50Us is way down, and they seem to be pretty hesitant to use them anywhere near Ukraine because of the sand bushes. And I know War News has had his hand up for a while.
Yeah, War News. Yeah, sorry, I didn't see your hand there. You're under my mute everyone button. War News.
Yeah, well, so greetings, everyone. Well, I just had one question here. I just recently saw a news that cites the source Wall Street Journal is claiming that actually U.S. is reshifting its focus on training younger cadets of the Ukrainian Air Force for the F-16 jets rather than shifting towards the experienced trained pilots. This really was already not a piece of cake for the experienced pilots of Ukrainian Air Force when it comes to training on F-16 jets, and now all of a sudden now this goes on to the younger cadets of Ukrainian Air Force. So I think would this really be impacting a lot on Ukraine's Air Force capability, since this is likely going to extend the timeline for Ukraine's Air Force training for F-16s even furthermore? What would really be the impact with this?
Shall I take that
Anyone
one?
want to take that? Yeah, go ahead, Hop.
Well, it definitely takes a long time to grow a fighter pilot. So they were always going to have to do this. They don't have enough experienced and sort of indigenous pilots that they can pull off the line to train. And even if you take an experienced MiG-29 pilot or Su-27 guy, or heck, even a Su-25 guy, and flip them into the F-16 training program, they're going to be out of pocket for 9 months. And when they come back, they will be less effective than a guy who's been doing it for a year, because they have to unlearn a lot, and they have to make room in their sort of auto mechanic and just basically ergonomic use of the cockpit controls in an F-16 and the weapon systems and the buttonology and everything else. There was always a limited number of Ukrainian pilots available, and now that the training slots have opened up a little bit, that opens up the door for the quote unquote cadets, and eventually those guys will be in the system. But it's going to take 18 to 24 months from the day they start, and that's 18 to 24 months of solid training with very little gaps. A week here, a week there, maybe 2 weeks, while they transition from one airframe to another. But this was always going to happen. The Ukrainian Air Force isn't big enough to just pull guys off the line and plug them into F-16 training. They were always going to have a mix of new and old.
Thanks. Oh, I saw you going out there, Forrest.
Go. Okay, no problem. Gunny, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, like HopC said, there's a pilot tried to explain it months ago. It's if you're really, I'm trying to remember what he said. If you're a really good pilot and you specialize in one aircraft, you and the aircraft are one. It is that mystical kind of thing. The fantastic pilots, they climb in the cockpit, get in the air, and it's that perfect sort of combination. Take them out of that. It's not just learning how to fly the aircraft. As HopC, it's learning to fight the aircraft. It's binning everything that you could do before and learning all the new fabulous stuff that you can do and maximizing it to its full advantage. So you've got the principles of airmanship down pat, but you're getting something with new toys in it, and how you fly a combat mission might be very, very different. And your all your instincts essentially have to be set to zero. I imagine there are going to be people in the pipeline who failed, who just didn't make the transition for one reason or another. You hear all these people talking about we can trim the course down. Unlike a NATO course, you can take weekends away, things like that. as Hop will tell you, there's a limit to the amount of time you can fly. There is a thing called mandated rest, and it's for a good reason. It's like any course. Any of us who've been on intensive courses, doesn't matter how keen you are, you've got to get your head down. You need breaks from it. You need time to recharge your batteries. Your body needs time to recharge. You're going to need to go out, have a few beers, get absolutely trolleyed. All of these kind of things, because there's no point burning recruits in the training pipeline out. So yeah, it's going to be an incredibly long process. I think it's interesting that we've heard different fighter pilots from different air forces give very varying sort of opinions, but then they're giving it from the viewpoint of different aircraft. And I've got no doubt, learning an F-16 is going to be possibly chalk and cheese to an F-35 or a Typhoon or a Mirage. So yeah, these are going to be really, really long processes, and these boys and girls are going to be golden bullets. So once again, to theatre, they'll need to acclimatise. Fly some missions, get their hand in, get used back to being in that really high threat environment instead of over a desert in the States or whatever, and then catch up on the developments within Ukraine, and there are some fabulous ones. Talking about AMRAAM, the UK has supplied Supercat 6x6 trucks with ASRAAM on board. And it looks like basically it's just a missile truck, and it takes its queuing over data link. Now, if you can do that with ASRAAM, chances are you can probably do that with AMRAAM. Now what have you got? You've got a 6x6 all-terrain vehicle running around near the front line, carrying a pair of AMRAAMs. Now, if that's data link capable, that opens up all sorts of exceptional possibilities, doesn't it? Because there might be an F-16 radiating well back, 50, 60, 70 miles, or that airborne early warning aircraft. And all they're having to do is illuminate. Your bomb truck is two guys in an armoured cab in a forest somewhere, popping off rounds. So, all of this sort of thing, I think, is going to change air warfare fundamentally. I think in the old days, we had the idea of a tracked, a tractor or a wheeled launcher just for defending, at the brigade and company level from air threats. And now we're going to see protected mobility vehicles running around with long-range air defense missiles and not radiating on anything, just taking their cues from other platforms.
Go ahead, Hop.
Yeah, that Silent Sam concept, which has been around for a little while, it is really finding its legs in the Link 16 world, and AMRAAM is Link 16 capable, so it's one of the net capable weapon systems. So that scenario that Gunny described is completely possible. It's not something that could happen. It's something that should happen, and that with some training and the right amount of link, it can happen. And with the Mirages and the F-16s coming up, and somebody's got an open mic. I think it's Forrest here.
My bad.
No worries, sir. With the Link 16 becoming more and more common, as Gunny said, an F-16 or a Mirage can become a communications nodule, even running the air picture from a Saab into an F-16 that's 60 miles closer to the forward edge of the battle area, and sending that on to some guy down in the forest with AMRAAMs on a mobile platform. So and that's one of the force multipliers that I think is more available to the Ukrainians than it is to the Russians. Z, you got your hand up, buddy.
Yeah, I had Forrest put something just talking about pilot training. I had Forrest put something in the nest. This is just like the artificial horizon. So the Ukrainians will be going from just that one instrument, and every instrument will be a little bit different, from an artificial horizon that looks like each of those, right? So they're going from the one on the right to the one on the left. So remember, you're in a high threat environment. You're not really looking at this instrument. You're looking at your periphery. You may be flying at night, and this is what you're trying to use to keep you from driving into the ground. So imagine a Ukrainian pilot that's been flying for 10 plus years using the instrument on the left the right, and now he's trying to use the instrument on the left, just for that, and multiply that by 15 systems in the cockpit. So when Hop talks about the unlearning, that's just an example of just flying the aircraft, not only combat, how you fly formations together. So I just wanted to point that out, how difficult that is. That if you've flown your whole life on the right and now you got to move to the left, that's not an easy task.
Hop.
Yeah, thank you for that. Go ahead, Hop.
Well, that is the perfect example that Z put up there. So, I mean, if you stop and, I've been looking at artificial horizons for 40 years. And anytime you change the display, and that is a huge change there from anything I had ever seen, that means you have to stop and look and split your attention and from all the other things that you're trying to pay attention to, weapons envelopes, communications in your ears, what your master arm panel setup is, all this other stuff. If you have to stop and instead of just sweeping across your instrument suite and seeing I'm level, I'm in a 45-degree bank, turn to the right. If your expectation over those 10 years that Z was talking about is that you're expecting to see something and you see something different, then you have to stop and look and analyze and go, oh, okay, yeah, that's what I wanted. And where was I? And you start whatever high acuity process you were doing again. So anyway, I think I might have dropped out there a little bit, but that is the perfect example.
By the way, I'd like to thank everyone for their responses to my questions. I'm just going to take leave because I'm just running out of battery, but thank you so much, guys, for your wonderful response. It's really enlightening quite a lot. So see you all.
Thanks for coming up. Hop, did you have your hand up there?
No, sir. I was just giving a thumbs up to Warren.
Oh, thank you. So do either of you two gentlemen have a different area you want to go into? We haven't talked a ton about rotary wing. I know, ZGoalman, you're a rotary wing kind of guy. Any updates there?
Yeah, nothing really. I think they have plenty of transport helicopters. I think Mi-8s are and Mi-17s are plentiful, so it's not their priority at the moment. To me, their next want would be an attack helicopter. Probably, and I've been advocating for a Cobra would be perfect for them because they come both in an attack and utility variant, and you get the synergies between the two. So your logistics chain is benefiting from that. So, but not really much change in that world right now. It seems to me that they would want eventually to be able to get some type of guided missile on a helicopter at some point. Just doesn't seem to have been the priority yet.
That kind of leads me into a little bit of a transition. Just a short little bit of advocacy here. The Stand With Ukraine Act is up in Congress. It's currently in committee, but it would allow Ukraine to be able to purchase things directly from the U.S. and make them a preferred non-NATO ally. And it specifically mentions fourth generation aircraft and rotary wing aircraft. So if it gets signed into law, it just makes it so much easier for Ukraine to get that, not having to ask for donated things and going through that whole process and going through congressional approval every time. Definitely a good thing if you're interested and you're an American. Call your reps, your senators, tell them to co-sponsor the bill and get it through committee. All right, Shaggy.
I put the number in the
Could you
nest to
take
do
over
that
for a
for us.
moment? Thank you. What a lovely graphic. All right.
Forrest, I'm going to have to drop down. I just want to thank everybody for joining us today.
Thank you so much, sir. And we'll get one of these on the books another time here soon. Go ahead, Hop.
Another sort of divergence from what we were doing. It was great hearing Z's voice, and the Ukraine Act would open a lot of doors for some combat capabilities that they're eventually going to need to kick the Russians back over the borders of 91. That being said, and this is a fun little thing, and it's a bit of a diversion, but I was wondering if I could talk for a few minutes about the S-70 drone shoot down that the Russians had the other day when they shot down their own loyal wingman. Would that be of interest to anybody?
Yes, please.
So my theory, and this is based a little bit on things that have happened historically. Many years ago, in December of 2011, the Americans were operating an RQ-170 out of Afghanistan, which and it might have even been a little bit over the border into Pakistan. Not important. It was our stealth drone, and really wasn't very well known, if at all, at this time. And the Iranians very cleverly managed to spoof it into by interrupting and jamming the GPS signal. They were given the flight paths. We're pretty sure by Russian intel, and they jammed the 170's GPS uplink and spoofed it into going into its go home mode, which is limited, and just said, "Hey, there's a problem. Time for you to go home." And so then they further spoofed which means gave it giving the airframe false coordinates through electronic measures, sending the aircraft basically into Iranian airspace, where apparently they had purposely built an airfield to mimic what imaging that the RQ-170 would have expected. And they got it to land on Iranian airspace, and it kind of hit hard because the Iranians hadn't foreseen that the field it was going to was at a different mean sea level altitude than the one it had originally thought it was going to, so it landed hard. Why is this important relative to the S-70? Well, I am of the opinion that the Ukrainians, probably with some Western help, did the exact same thing to that S-70 combat drone, as evidenced by the fact that of all the directions for them to lose control over it, due west seemed to be the direction that it chose. And when they lost control of it and couldn't regain it, it was probably due to GPS jamming. As obvious, there was the Su-57 that was not too far behind it, which should have been the controlling nodule. So it was somehow its signal was overwhelmed and or disabled or jammed or whatever. And they were left with the options of, since they couldn't get it to turn around, they shot it down, which made me smile and gave me a warm feeling inside, because it was just another example of those rascally Ukrainians finding a way to poke a finger into the Russians' eyes and take away another capability. And the drone, I believe, was recoverable by Ukrainian forces, in which case it's already in Fort Meade or someplace like that, getting taken apart and analyzed for whatever information that the Western forces need. And I just thought that was a fun little story that I believe is probably true without too much supposition, especially based on what we do know is that it was shot down by its own country and that it was headed due west when it was shot down. So it's just another example of how the tit for tat and the push me pull you aspect, especially of EW.
Hop, I did throw the video or some of the video up in the nest of the wreckage and the shoot down.
Perfect.
It's pretty fun to watch the actual shoot down. We typically don't see as much of that, at least anymore.
And another thing I found interesting in that, and super unprofessional for the standpoint of the Russians, is if it's the video I saw, the contrails are super heavy, and which when you're operating daylight VFR, that is rule number one: don't fly at a level where you're going to be contrailing, which is just another. I mean that Su-57, if there had been any ground-based air defense around there, even with its insert air quotes stealth capabilities, it wasn't very stealthy then. There was a white line coming out of the back of it. So I found that just on a side note interesting also.
Yeah, the 57s or something, man. It's crazy to know how much money that they spent on developing that over however long, and they turned out to be a piece of junk. But I did want to ask you about the situation that happened in Alaska. Was that last week with the Su-35 buzzing the F-16s? You had mentioned unprofessional by leaving contrails so everyone can be seen. How often do situations like that with the Russians? How often is that happening?
Unfortunately, a lot nowadays. There was a time, and I think Gunny could probably attest to this too, that there was a fair level of professionalism in the what was then the Soviet military, and it carried on for a while into the Russian military. But that I personally know a guy that was knocked out of the sky by a Chinese interceptor hitting his aircraft. I met some Norwegians that had a Russian Su-27 hit their patrol plane, and they both flew away. A little worse for wear, but they both aircraft made it home. That is becoming more and more common. There's a set of international laws out there that are supposed to prescribe the proper intercept procedures. If you want to know what a proper intercept procedure looks like, look up any video of, say, the Brits intercepting a bear off the in the GUIK Gap, or Americans intercepting a Russian or Chinese patrol. That's how it's done. When you see that Su-35 fill the screen on the F-16's HUD video, that we're talking feet and they're both traveling the same direction, probably 500 knots. That Su-35 can't even see him because he's belly on. So he is just hoping that he's pulling enough G's and that he's not going to end up, impacting that F-16 with some part of his aircraft. And, they're all out to sea, single seat. That, you go into the water, you're a dead man. So it's incredibly
What's the ROE?
reckless.
What's the ROE for the American? Do we know?
No, I don't. I mean, they're not going to shoot. They're not going to shoot first. Probably, they would have to wait for some sort of weapons engagement. I mean, probably the loosest I can imagine it would be, because we're not at war with Russia, would be a locking up with actual, radar in an attack position, showing signs of of an imminent launch. And even that, you get some relatively junior, lieutenant or captain out there flying the intercept, and he might be a little hesitant to to even if he's been raised as a young tiger to be aggressive and fearless, he's going to think twice before he opens up his master arm, greens it up, and tries to do anything that you can't be undone. I have no idea what the ROE is, but it'd be pretty restrictive.
Yeah, that makes sense. Gunny.
Yeah, I mean, the thing with Russians is sometimes they can be really professional, certainly in terms of submarine ops in the Northern Fleet, and how they sort of sniff around and have a good look at us on exercise. But then they take ketamine and they pull off incredibly stupid stunts like this. I mean, the launching of the air-to-air missile in company with a Royal Air Force RC-135 over the Black Sea, the repercussions of that could have been potentially horrendous, because then you'd have been looking at well over a dozen UK military personnel dead in a deliberate act. Where that would have gone, who knows? So now we've seen a curtailment of that. The RAF sort of carried on for a while and started putting up Typhoon escorts with them, but we're not really seeing those kind of flights over the east of the Black Sea anymore. I don't think that's a case of we've been intimidated. I think that's a case of is the juice worth the squeeze, because these idiots might have an accident and might, actually genuinely through incompetence kill a Royal Air Force aircraft. Not a fabulous state of affairs. You could argue, well, did they fire off the missile deliberately and then said it was an accident? I can buy that as well. It's the kind of stupid thing that they do. But I think, unfortunately, it has to one degree or another had an effect on NATO I-Star flights over the Black Sea. We've seen a considerable drop-off. And when RC-135s do go up, they stay pretty close to Romanian airspace and have an escort of some kind. What's been going on with the RC-135s that have been looking into Murmansk, etc., the past few months? I think we'll probably find out in due course that they were getting intercepted regularly as well. That would make sense. And I wouldn't personally be surprised if the Norwegian Air Force have been running escorts for them, as they do a good look at the Northern Fleet bases. That wouldn't surprise me either, simply because of the way the Russians are behaving. But as I said, they have these moments. In the 1970s, a destroyer shadowing HMS Ark Royal had a fire on board and fired a torpedo by accident, allegedly. Luckily, she turned away at the time, but that was the excuse given. Imagine that, at the height of the Cold War, Russian destroyer torpedoes Royal Navy aircraft carrier. Well, wouldn't have been great by any stretch of the imagination. So I'm also interested in this pilot. I mean, either he's a hot shot or he was lucky. Given all their good pilots are probably balls deep in Ukraine at the moment, I think the other worrying thing is this is probably just someone who's not been flying particularly long has managed to get himself a squadron flying their hot rod aircraft, but he's probably not as good as he should be. I don't know about you, Hop, but my gut feeling is he probably landed and the cockpit needed cleaning out after. I'm not convinced that was intentional. I think maybe he tried to be clever and probably shat himself after because he cut it just a little bit too close. But, as we know, that's all it takes with these morons. I think the other thing that's really interesting is the regular or sort of intermittent bear visits the UK has. They've tapered off quite a lot. There was a stage where they were becoming not regular, but it didn't really raise any eyebrows when a bear would approach the UK ADZ. That seems to have died a death. Does that speak to airframe availability in the bear force? I suspect so. I don't know about anyone else, but I'm wondering if shortage of spares, aircraft availability, whatever, have meant that they're just keeping the bear force and the backfire force back. In fact, I think the last visit we had might have been a white swan, but that was a good few months ago. So are they having spares issues, maintenance issues, aircraft availability issues? Yeah, it's another thing I think might be worth keeping an eye on.
Thank you for that. It certainly it puts so much pressure on the American pilots or the British pilots or whoever's up there to maintain that discipline, and I'm glad we generally do. So go ahead, Hop.
Yeah, I think it was not skill, just luck that guy didn't hit the F-16 with the belly of his aircraft. He had no idea how close he was. Once you lose sight, once you roll, say, past 20 degrees angle bank away, you have no idea what your closure rate is, and you don't know what the other aircraft is doing. You just have to assume that he's not trying to, if that F-16 had been climbing just a few feet of, a second, or had angled it, had dropped a couple of degrees angled bank into the flight path vector of that of the Russian jet, they would have both been lost. So it was nothing but just plain old stupid luck. The lack of the bears showing up off the especially the UK coast, I think speaks to a couple things. One, probably a potential for maintenance issues, and the priorities being for the missile trucks that operate east of Ukraine, and secondly, sort of a little bit of the dying down of some of the nuclear rhetoric that has been put out by Putler. There's sort of a rhythm to these things. I think they like to do both, or take advantage of one or they coordinate the ops in a sense that what a great time to rattle the nuclear saber, as it were, when a nuclear capable, or at least Russian aircraft that the average Joe thinks might be nuclear capable, shows up off your coast and has to be intercepted. Ooh, it's very scary, but not really. So I think those two things might be a factor, but I would lean more towards the fact that they just have a hard time keeping these things airborne. They're old, and who knows what the status of their spare stock is like.
Go ahead, Gunny.
Yeah, just reference nuclear rhetoric. Was it yesterday, day before, 3 RC-135s did a look into Kaliningrad. And I'm still of the opinion that their short and intermediate range nuclear forces there doing readiness exercises. Kaliningrad is not a big area, and 3 RC-135s. One of them was a 135 Combat Cent, which it is more for looking at radar air defenses, stuff like that, but I imagine has some other inbuilt capabilities. 3 of them, that an awful lot. It's not the peak that we've seen looking into Kaliningrad. There was one day where I think we had 7 aircraft. There was an E8 J-Stars, there were RC-135s, there was that Gulfstream, the Black Ops one, there were the 2 twin turboprop, the Beechcraft signals intelligence aircraft the US were running out of the Baltic states. That was the absolute peak, but 3 RC-135s really caught my interest. And an RQ-4 was looking in there a couple of days before that. So I'm wondering if is the verbal rhetoric running in rotation with the physical drive the trucks out the shelters and pre-deployment to launch positions to try and rattle cages. That's my gut feeling. I mean, what else is there in Kaliningrad now? I mean, it was 18th Corps. I mean, that was but by their measure, some of the best units in the Russian army, which is like winning world's best pony fondler. But that was an awful lot of combat power. There was a top-end motorized motor rifle regiment there with a lot of increased attached armor, a Marine brigade, and elements of that were deployed to Ukraine weeks after the invasion. So I doubt there's anything in Kaliningrad left that really merits that kind of interest, apart from the intermediate short-range nuclear forces that they've got. And I think they just do that just to try and intimidate. I think they deploy to war footing, get the vehicles out to the sites, do the readiness drills, and then get them back in, and that may alternate with a verbal rhetoric.
Before we go to HopC, can someone explain what a bear is for the audience? I've heard you both mention it, but
Yeah, so
Gunny, you want to take that? Go ahead.
yeah, so it's a follow-on from the Badger, massive big turboprop aircraft, supposedly the noisiest aircraft in the world when it's going full throttle. Lots of versions of it, but it was conceived to do a couple of things: maritime strike, so they carry big anti-ship missiles, and Red Storm Rising Star regimental forces fly down into the Atlantic or into the Norwegian Sea, attack NATO carrier groups, and try and interdict convoys of reinforcements coming across. Then on top of that, there's an anti-submarine version, or something there used to be. I think there still is. So maritime patrol aircraft, dedicated jammers, electronic intelligence versions, all that kind of thing. So it's actually, it looks a bit archaic, but it's got phenomenal range, and all it has to do is carry a lot of ordnance to a firing point, and in that, it's pretty good. As an ASW aircraft, anti-submarine warfare aircraft, yeah, probably not. But they did, I think they restarted production, didn't they, Hop? Or did they start reconditioning them? Because they decided the White Swan was too expensive, wasn't it? Backfires are getting harder to maintain. I think they went through a stage and decided Bear was good enough.
it's an atrociously
Yeah, I think they
ugly
did.
plane. Sorry.
Oh my gosh, it's beautiful in flight. It's it's bigger than you think. I mean, it does have all sort of those knobs and wigglies off it that make it look not sleek. But I remember being on the wing of one in the Atlantic, and they were clearly done with their mission, and they gave us a little wing waggle, and then poured on the coals. And I was in a P3. We couldn't keep up. We kept up with them for a little bit, and then they just accelerated and climbed away for a little beach time in Cuba. They, I do think I'm almost certain they started a reconditioning program. I just don't know if they put it back into production. I'd have to go back and check, but it does what it does very well in a kind of a crude way. It's not a sophisticated airplane, but it is they've wrung every little last bit of effectiveness out of it. It wasn't very good at ASW. It was just a little bit too much, and their technology was their airborne ASW technology was crap back then. It's probably gotten a little better based on stuff they've probably stolen from us, but they can't make enough of it for it to make a difference.
Can you imagine how big the noise cancelling earphones must be on them for the Taz Fox guys? It must have been like
They probably
it must have been the size of woks.
do you ever remember that movie Spaceballs when the guy wore the massive helmet? That's probably what their noise canceling headsets look like. You could literally hear it, feel it from about 100 meters away. That was the closest we got to it, but you could just sort of hear the thrum of the engine over our own. So it was. I wonder what the guys that have flying fast jets when they've intercepted it sort of at altitude. I'm sure they can hear it quite clearly, when they're throttled back. But yeah, they would have looked like a Mickey Mouse on steroids with their ANCs.
And it had a radar that anyone who was in the warfare role in NATO navies in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, if you heard big bulge, 245, big bulge, that meant that a world of pain was coming your way. And you would have dozens of KH-22s launched at the carrier. So, you know, if you're in the Royal Navy in the ops game, big bulge was one of the electronic warfare calls that you'll always remember that. And Serrano and Handbrake, which were excellent.
Thank you both for going into that a little bit. Sometimes I find that names and acronyms not everyone fully understands, because I didn't until recently. So, Hop, you had your hand up for something else. You want to go ahead and go with whatever that topic was?
Actually, whatever it is has now escaped my pea-shaped and sized brain.
Yeah, I get it, man. I get it. So, welcome back, Latin. Are you with us? Maybe not just quite yet. Any other topics, Hop, that you wanted to touch on today? I have a handful of questions.
I got a couple of questions. Anybody know anything about helicopters? Oh, but before that, Latin's got his hand up.
Hey guys, yeah, I just came back. One topic that I had wanted to touch on, well, I did kind of touch on it, but I wanted everybody's opinion, unless it's already been discussed. We were looking at big picture where the Ukrainian Air Force is at now. Russian Air Force, and in particular their glide bomb campaign. I'm interested in some of the other guys' opinion on where we think, what are they achieving right now? What were you maybe thinking that campaign, where that campaign might go earlier in the summer? General ideas on what are they accomplishing with this right now?
That's a good question.
Go ahead, Forrest, please.
I was just going to say, I recall you coming up and talking about the potential for glide bombs to get really out of hand and really bad. And that didn't necessarily happen in that worst case scenario. But go ahead, Hop.
Well, I think, in my opinion, that they've been using the glide bombs as sort of a placebo for having any kind of ability to effectively maneuver on the warfield, on the battlefield from the ground side. You know, Gunny's been on both sides of the fence. I was never a ground guy, so I don't really know. But to me, I saw them as using that to sort of cover up a lot of the issues that they were having with maneuver warfare. Obviously, the Ukrainians were doing a pretty effective job of holding them. Additionally, but you know, whatever successes they have had have often seemed to have been led by using the glide bombs. It's a cheap, relatively effective way of masking how much how ineffectual their fixed wing force has become. And I find it interesting that I've seen no sign of, in Latin, you track this stuff out better than I do, of Russian Su-24s being converted to carry the Fabs. So that's more of a question than a statement. Have you seen any indication that what remains of the Russian Su-24 force has been converted for the Fab mission?
Well, I'm not sure to what extent, like there might be something of an actual conversion involved. I'm not sure that it appears to me that they're using the standard mounts on, I mean, they're mounting it off of the bomb itself, the Fab series bomb itself. And then when the bomb falls, it flips over and the aerodynamic kit, the UMPK kit, engages, the wings swing out. So I don't think they've had to do any modifications in terms of targeting either. The fact they're using the Su-34 makes me think that, like the Ukrainians, well, similar, I think, to the way the Ukrainians are using Storm Shadow Scalp. The second crewman is playing a role in that somehow. my question, and maybe I'll try to focus it in a little more, because at the beginning of the summer, it was my concern. It was the concern I was hearing from a lot of analysts and a lot of Ukrainian voices, was Kharkiv in particular. Would the Russians be able to use this weapon as something that could really cause severe damage to that city? And when I say severe damage, I'm not negating any of the damage that has been done, but I'm talking about the kind of catastrophic damage that would force a significant part of the population of that city to evacuate, creating a refugee crisis. That was the concern that I remember hearing at the time. From what I've seen, and I was away for a while and with limited access to the internet, but from what I've seen, the Russian tactics haven't changed a lot. They've added some capability to those weapons. They've added the larger UMPK kit that gives them a little more range, and they're using definitely going up, scaling up the size of the ordnance. So they seem to be using 1,500 kilo fairly regularly. 3,000, I don't think that's happening yet, because they would have to do that off the bomber, and I just don't think they're committed to doing that yet. So in terms of size, from 500 to 1,500, slightly longer range, but I'm not seeing them scaling it up in terms of doing anything more than maybe 2-ship formations. That's typically what I've seen up until recently. Maybe you guys have seen the same thing. But where we are now, it seems to me that they have not been able to, or have not been willing to, scale anything up to the stage where they'd be able to really have that other scenario that I was articulating a minute ago happen. To be absolutely clear, that those weapons are taking a real beating on infrastructure. They're taking a lot of innocent Ukrainian lives. That's a given. But I'm talking about, I want everybody to understand, I'm talking about another scenario, another step up. That has not happened yet. And I'm wondering what you guys think about. Is that an intentional decision on the part of the Russians? I suspect not. I think it's probably they're having difficulty scaling that up to anything that would reach that level. I don't know. What do you guys think?
I agree with you. Oh, please go ahead.
I was just calling on you, trying to get the dead air.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, I think it's that they're having a hard time scaling it up. About the same time in this past summer, Rand came out with a pretty interesting result of the studies of what the attrition, both combat and just the number of sorties they were running was having on hollowing out the Russian Air Force. And it flips back to some of what Gunny was talking about earlier with the Bears, the Tu-95s. I think what you're seeing is the cumulative effect, as far as scaling up and doing more than 2-ship missions, of the ops tempo, and the effect it's having mostly on their airframes. And the Ukrainian mission set that targets Russian airfields and forces them to move them farther and farther back from the forward battle area. So I think it's those two things. I think it's the sort of attritional effects of running high tempo ops for nearly 3 years. And the inability to ratchet up from that. That's my opinion.
Go ahead, Whiskey. Gunny.
Yeah, I'd like to know what profile they're flying to is. One of my questions would be, what do they perceive the air threat to be, and therefore are they having to drop these from much further back, which means that they'll be doing the long toss thing. So, are they having to do like we've seen with the attack helicopters, where they go into a steep climb, release a weapon to get added range, and then do a hard turn and get back on the deck? Are they genuinely very scared about the air threat, and this is having some kind of limitation on how often they can fly these? and of course on the aircraft as well, because I don't know really much about delivering bombs, but I would imagine, for a very heavy payload, if you're going to do a long toss, to get any degree of accuracy, first of all, you need a delivery system that's going to give you your pointers for doing it, and you're going to need a lot of forward velocity and the ability to climb quite rapidly, and then once the bomb's gone, you sort of get out of dodge fairly quickly. So that really interests me, how they're doing it, how far back they're doing it, and is that having any kind of limitation on how often they can do this and the size of the actual weapon that they're delivering.
Go ahead, Latin.
I'll take a stab at that one, Gunny, because I study these videos that they release every now and then. Israeli analyst Guy Plofsky does a great job of posting this stuff and breaking it down, taking stills. Everything I'm seeing tells me it's probably maximum, maybe.
Latin, we're breaking up a bit. Anyone else have Latin?
No, he dropped on. Okay. I can't hear him anymore.
All right, Latin, if you can hear us, maybe recycle.
Did I cut off?
Yeah, you cut off.
Probably, maybe I got to the point where I was saying that from the videos that I'm seeing, I'm guessing probably between 60 and 80 kilometer standoff range for launch. And altitude does not indicate that they're worried about that they have any sense of an air defense threat, because they're doing these from medium level. I mean, it looks to me like about, on average, maybe about 10,000, 15,000 feet. As far as any kind of like low profile, like you were mentioning, Gunny, where they pop up, because we saw the Ukrainians showed us that with the MiG-29 delivering a French AASM. I haven't seen any of that from the Russians. I don't know for sure that they're doing it. But one of the things, the other factors here that might be an issue for them is that we know that they scrambled to get these weapons put together and operational. The Ukrainians are developing one of their own. They've shown us some images of those. And one of the first things that I noticed with the Ukrainian one is, my first impression was just that it looked a lot more streamlined, in addition to having what appeared to be some kind of a booster engine. But we know that the Russians had issues with release of the accidental release of these weapons over their own territory. But there's also the issue of fatigue, particularly I'm thinking on the wing and on the main spar, because these weapons were not developed properly. You know that these things take time, right? So that could be another problem that they're encountering with some of their aircraft, because typically you see the Su-34s with they carry 4 500 kilo class weapons on 4 of the wing weapons stations. The 1500 kilo, which is newer, the more recent operational, made operational more recently, they carry on the center line. That again would raise issues there. That could be putting stresses on the aircraft that it wasn't designed for. So I think that's one area, and we're not going to find any of that out for a long time, but I suspect there could be issues there.
Thank you, brother. Go ahead, Hop.
Sort of adding to the as the weight of these weapons increases, obviously their volume and drag count out in the airflow increases commensurately, and it's not a linear progression. These are very draggy weapons. The fabs aren't streamlined. Really, they almost look like World War II bombs. The design may, in fact, go back that far. You look at a fab silhouette, and you look at, say, just your standard garden variety Mark 82 or 84, or any of these. Our bombs are much more streamlined, and that's before we throw, winglets and things like that on there. So my point being is that even with a streamlined weapon, when we used to fly around with harpoons, it would just kill our fuel flows would go up, our time on station would drop commensurately. This is all happening at the same time that they're pushing these the bases that the aircraft are operating out of farther and farther back. My guess is operationally they are probably limited to these two weapons, if for no other reason than they need some time on station in case they don't launch as soon as they arrive at their at the launch point, and that these are very draggy weapons, especially with the clunky wings and clunky deployment things mechanism that they have on them that's hanging down into the airstream. You look at those and you compare them to, say, some of our glide bombs from the West, the GBU-39s or something like that. There are much more streamlined, less drag count weapon. That so their time on station might be limited also, and therefore they're carrying two weapons and not four, or they're just finding operationally that they don't have enough targets. But my guess is it's a combination of both, with the preference being to the fact that it's really hard to get there and have any time to do anything tactical from the bases that are farther back with these very draggy, sort of imperfect weapons that were sort of jury rigged, as it were. That's my guess.
It looks like Latin dropped down, so he's not going to be able to respond there. Gunny, did you want to come back? Oh, here he is. He popped up.
Down because I couldn't hear Hop, but I was able to hear most of that Hop. So another on a different subject, but related to airframe fatigue. Anyways, another thing I think that we need to watch, if those of us that are kind of watching the air war, is the now fabled Ukrainian Su-24 force, which they will write numerous books about, I'm sure, at some point. That's been a tremendous effort by, I believe it's the 7th Brigade that was flying those at the beginning of the war. I have serious questions about the viability of that aircraft. Most of what they're flying, I think, at this point is probably recovered airframes. They lost most of their force in the first year, within the first few months of the conflict. Very brave guys flying. They weren't flying at low level back then. They were flying a lot of medium level, and they got hit. They got hit pretty bad. But this is the force that carries Storm Shadow and Scalp. I don't know if anybody saw the video from a few days ago. Fantastic video. Looks like taken by a farmer. You could see his combine behind him, but he had an Su-24 coming right at him and put on a little bit of an air show for him as he put it.
I lost you.
Did you lose?
I lost you for a second, but I got you now. You said put on a bit of an air show.
Yeah, he put on a pilot. If anybody hasn't seen it, I don't post on.
It's the
I
first
post
tweet
on Blue Sky. Go to Blue Sky. Check it out there.
It's the first tweet in the nest.
The one, the Su-24, the low pass.
Yep, all the way to the right. Oh, I lied.
Okay, so
I'll put it up there right now, though.
Okay, if anybody hasn't seen it, check it out. It's pretty cool. But it shows us that force is still very much active and involved in that really important tasking. But there definitely has to be concerns about how long they can keep that going with aircraft that are probably, I wouldn't be surprised if most of that fleet is way past any safety limits by Western standards. And this is where the Mirage 2000s might come in, because we know that they're going to be modified. The former French Air Force batch, at least, will be modified for air to ground. That you got to think that's got to be one of the weapon systems that would be integrated, is because the ground attack and export variants of the Mirage 2000 do carry that weapon. And that would allow the Ukrainians to bring in a new airframe and maybe take some of the pressure off of that Su-24 force. If that happens, that's good news for that, but bad news for what will be a continued campaign against cruise missiles and drones through the winter. That said, increasing number of F-16s that will probably be primarily tasked with that for now, and an Su-27 and MiG-29 force that is still doing pretty good work in that area, from what we can tell. They're routinely flying those missions day and night against those targets. So, anyways, just a few thoughts on another aspect of the Ukrainian Air Force, that Su-24 force, which is one to really watch. Very small, relative to the importance of what they've been doing over the last, what is it, about year and a half since they got Storm Shadow Scalp.
Thank you for that. I wonder the addition of the U.S. kit and the other all the new planes coming in. I hope that gives the pilots and the maintenance crews and all the guys who have been working 24/7 for 600 and it's more than 600 since the war started. They've been busting their ass to keep those planes in the air, and I'm sure they're thousands upon thousands of hours past the date at which those planes should still be flying. I hope they get a moment to breathe a little bit when the F-16s and Mirages are there, and maybe take some R&R and go get retrained on something else. But yeah, Sir Shaggy, do you have any questions you'd like to ask? We are a little bit over time. I'm good to stay on for a bit. Kind of up to you.
Sticky mic button. I'm just enjoying listening, actually. Yeah, carry on.
All right. So, do we anticipate seeing any? I'll hold that question. Go ahead, Latin.
Well, if we're getting close to wrapping up, I just wanted to share kind of the bigger picture thought that a lot of us, we that are really kind of have our heads in the air war, we talk a lot. I know sometimes we get in the weeds a bit too much, but I think for the average person that has an interest in Ukraine, supporter of Ukraine, a lot of people listening today that I recognize here from way back in the pro-Ukraine community, that have, their question really is, what, at the end of the day, for all the subtypes and variants and aircraft and weapon systems that we talk about, they want to know, will the Ukrainians be able to, if not completely stop, at least take some of the wind out of this horrific bombing campaign that Russia is on? And, here we are a few months into F-16s, the initial number, modest number of F-16s operational. We just have to keep repeating over and over again, there are no magic bullets. There's nothing the Ukrainian Air Force can be provided with. Even if the political will was there to provide anything possible, there's nothing that would be able to make a change overnight. The building up of a Western Ukrainian Air Force with similar capabilities, not just fighter aircraft, but the enablers, all the other, we've touched on some of those, the AEW, the tankers, that's a big capability they're going to have down the road. That's going to take years. And so what we're seeing right now is this gradual addition of Western technology. It will start, I think the most immediate thing we can say is that it's going to start to, particularly the F-16s, will be able to, probably are right now already taking some of the pressure off of the ground-based air defense that have been working so hard over the last 2 years. And that's it for now. But there's the Ukrainian Air Force will not be able to eliminate the glide bomb or the ballistic missile, even with long-range fires, even with some of those weapon systems that are spoken about so much that we're hoping that the U.S. and others will approve. I'm in favor of that, right? Don't get me wrong. I'm in favor of them being able to do that, but it won't completely eliminate the problem. I mean, they can hit. The Russians may not be as good as Ukrainians in dispersed operations. I personally believe that, but they are capable of moving their aircraft from one base to another, and they have a lot of bases. They have a lot of airfields. So this is still going to be a bit of a grind.
Absolutely. Go ahead, Primus.
Thank you. Yeah, talking about the Su-24s and how they kind of regenerated some of the force, and just like how much the existing Ukrainian Air Force was started work, and I got involved. Can you imagine what the complexion of this war would be if they didn't have those Su-24s, if they didn't have Storm Shadow? Like how different this would be? It'd be a very different situation on the ground and in the air, I'm sure.
Well, without Storm Shadow Scalp, they wouldn't have had anything with that range. So you can eliminate any of the targets that they've been able to hit with. I mean, they have the drones, and that's a capability that continues to grow. But those are still not in the same category. Maybe someday they will be, but in terms of the explosive, the amount of the size of the weapon that they're able to carry, it's still pretty modest. But we're watching on it in real time how they're scaling that up and getting results with it.
Primus, did you want to come back?
Oh yeah, but they've innovated quite a bit between drones and how they modified the Neptunes and so on. But yeah, I mean, there's not much of a replacement for a 1,000-pound warhead on a cruise missile that goes several hundred kilometers at a quick pace. There's just Crimea wouldn't be anywhere near as beaten up as it is without the storm shadows there like that. Submarine would still be afloat. They might even still be in Sevastopol and operating out of there. Change the complexion of war. It's not a magic bullet, but I mean it's adjacent. Definitely.
Well, it's an important capability. But Primus, you bring up an important point, and I think it's one of the next things to happen in the air war that I'm watching for on a daily basis is any kind of confirmation or indication that they have been able to get to some stage of development or deployment of an air-launched Neptune. That would give them the ability to do something that, for the most part, Washington wouldn't have much say in. We know that they've done some strikes recently, long range, quite long range, with Neptune that have been credited to the Ukrainian Navy. And whether that is a ground-based Neptune with extended range. I know that before the war, I've said this before, there was talk of, and was never funded, was never approved, but for an air-launched Neptune. That would be something that would give you, that's an relatively easy way to give you a significant increase in range. I can't help but think that the Ukrainians are looking into this, but there's no open source evidence of that. It's just when you put the pieces together pre-2022, it makes sense that they would be pursuing this, and maybe with the help of partners. But maybe at some point, that's what I'm watching for on a daily basis when I follow Ukrainian Air Force, and I'm looking for any evidence that may be happening, because that would be a big step.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, that would mean they could also take those out at sea, and then maybe go after some of the the Russian warships at sea with Neptunes. From the results of the Moskva, it seems like they work pretty well against ships as well. So I think it's a necessary capability. But if they could air mount harpoons on an F-16, which I think you can, you kind of get a similar capability on that. So it's just the skies are getting much more on friendly place. I'm sure you kind of covered it at this point. I've been in and out, but the addition of JSOW, I think, is going to be very interesting in the long term, medium term, even because it gives the Ukrainian Air Force their own glide bomb capability. That'll be nice.
All right, we had another hand that was in the air. I'm not sure who that was.
I think Cece had her end up, but
I
don't know where she went.
Go ahead, Cece.
Wave your hands in the air like you just don't care. This has been such a great discussion. I just love it when you guys have these. So thank you for doing this. And Forrest, it doesn't go unnoticed that this was just a circus for you because of Twitter glitches with everyone. Like, I couldn't hear anybody else half the time. I had to come up and down. I know everybody else was. So thank you and Shaggy for having the patience to just, be dealing with the circus that is Twitter this morning. And yes, I still call it Twitter on purpose. Also, if you like what you guys hear, all you folks out there, if you can help, and I understand that, there's also Europeans that think that they can't help, but you can, because I was going to use a really vulgar Southernism. You sure as heck can get your American friends to call Congress, because if we can get the president to have these actions that he can take with the Stand With Ukraine bill, Ukrainians are going to be a lot better off, right? So we won't just be listening to all the facts of, Ukrainians fighting and dying, but we'll actually be helping them. So if you guys can do that as a tip to the guys who took their time out to speak today, as well as to Ukrainians, instead of just imbibing information, it's super important, because it really will provide so much help to Ukraine. And it is in the nest. So again, if you can't call because you're not in here, I'm going to put it as the first one so it's not buried while I'm talking. Even if you don't have a Congress critter, you can easily spread the word, spread the gospel to steal the graphic from me if you don't like me. Do whatever you need to do to get Americans calling and dialing to help these Ukrainians. Thanks.
Absolutely. And today I suggest doing it for Juice and for Moonfish. Juice being the MiG-29 pilot who was killed training over a year ago. And then Moonfish, who was in an incident about a month or two ago and did not make it. So do it for those gentlemen.
Just bringing F-16s into the country and, the training and the lobbying and stuff those two guys did, in many ways they paid for it with their lives, and because it's just that important for this to happen. But there's a cost, and there's going to continue to be one, because war is hell and it takes the best of us.
Go ahead.
So for people that join kind of midway or late, was the question asked about, I saw that more F-16s had come in. Do we know at all ballpark how many?
Go ahead, Latin.
The latest announcement was 6 from Norway. Now, Norway has committed more than that, but that was an announcement of what is imminent now. That'll be, I imagine, I don't remember a specific time frame, but it was, as I understood it, and I read a couple of articles, the Norwegian government saying 6 will be delivered soon. So that's in addition to, initially there was about 6, and then the Netherlands announced that by the end of the year they'd be providing, of the ones that they've committed, at least I think 12. So that gets us up. That's where I get to that rough number of 2 Ukrainian squadrons of F-16s potentially operational by the end of the year, at least in this basic air defense role. And CC, I'm going to put out, as a Canadian, I'm going to put out something that I believe that may be a good thing for pro-Ukraine people to be talking about in the US right now. This is my opinion as a Canadian, that of the many things that could happen to Ukraine if Trump is elected president, I personally believe it'll be catastrophic for the F-16 program. It's at too early a stage of development in Ukraine. The Europeans have some depth with that type, and they'd be able to maybe help them, but it would be the beginning of a countdown to that aircraft no longer being viable for the Ukrainians. Period. Full stop. I'm convinced of that. And the Europeans would have to step in with their aircraft. So that's something to consider. If somebody is considering Ukraine as part of their equation for voting, and they're horrified at the images that they see on a regular basis of cruise missiles and drones hitting civilians, then that's something they should consider.
Yep, absolutely. And that day is drawing near, my friend. I cannot wait for it to be done and over, and hopefully in a way that Ukraine can be most successful. Go ahead, Hop.
I was just going to come up and say thanks so much to Shaggy and Forrest, Primus, Latin, Z, if you're out there listening, and everybody who had questions. I'm going to have to roll, but I do appreciate the opportunity to speak to and hear from you all. CC, keep up the good work, and we will. I'll be listening. We'll talk to you guys soon. Thanks so much for a wonderful space. Well done, Forrest and Shaggy.
Thank you for being a part of it, and look forward to doing another one soon. Have a good one, Hop.
All right, I think so.
All right.
Amazing space. I just have one small request. I happen to be moderator of NAFO on Reddit, and I'd like to put the right message out there to contact Congress. But I was wondering if anybody could send me like a message, like an exact message, like what I should address for this whole matter, and then I can put it out there. I can make a sticky topic about it, and we have a crowd of 20,000 there, so at least some more people will see it there. So I was wondering if somebody could do that. Sorry.
I got you, man. I'll send you the graphic here as soon as we wrap up. Go ahead, Cece.
Yeah, Vatnik, I'm not sure, you don't follow me, but I'm obsessed with the matter, so give me a follow and I'll send you some stuff too.
That would be amazing. Thanks, guys.
All right. Latin, do you have anything else you want to cover? It's just you on the lonely speakers panel of the aviation experts at this moment. You know what? I'm just remembering I got a listener question a while ago from a different person, specifically about air defense of over the horizon radar that was destroyed, I believe, a lot in Crimea and a couple other places. Do you know if that capacity has been rebuilt? I think Gunny took off as well. He might have this answer.
I think we're talking about the Nebo radar, these giant arrays that they have
Yeah, the big.
that have this ridiculous range of 2,000 kilometers or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think they took one out a while ago, and then they took another. I'm pretty sure they two may have been at least hit. And the most recent one was in Crimea. I think, pretty sure it was Crimea. But I mean, have they been able? You know, to what extent they were damaged? Were they able to rebuild them? I don't know. That's a hard one. But those are pretty important assets, and the Ukrainians have hit a number of. I mean, quite a few come to mind. A handful over the last year that they've hit of that kind of that kind of long range fixed system. Well, Nebo is sort of it's not completely fixed, but it's mobile, but it's a pretty big system. They have to. It takes a while for them to move it. Um, yeah, eventually we'll see whether that has it. I would say that if you want to get an idea of whether or not they've had some success with that, other than the initial reports of having hit it, is look for what happens in the days after. Look for a storm shadow strike, for example, where maybe the Su-24 unit, as a result of that strike on Russian radar, are able to get in a little bit deeper, a little bit closer to the target. That would be my guess for what to look for.
Go ahead, Primus.
Yeah, Latin, and I see who else is here. Well, I guess it's just Latin at this moment. I see over the horizon radar. What is your impression of how that's different than like a traditional radar, like you might see like on a Patriot or something like that? Because it's a different kind of fish.
Well, I'm not a radar expert, Primus, full disclosure. I couldn't really go into much of the technical detail except to say I know that it's not, it's a mechanical scanned radar. If we're talking about Nebo in particular, if you've seen the antenna itself, it's massive and it spins. It fits a mechanical scanning radar. I know that it's just known for its extreme range, um, and other aspects of its capability, like its resistance to jamming, its ability to track multiple targets, all of that stuff. I don't know enough about it, except to know it. I get the impression it's a pretty important resource for the Russians, and the Ukrainians have targeted. The Ukrainian targeting seems to reflect that they see it as a serious threat as well.
I mean, my understanding of over horizon radar, and I need to look it up as it keeps coming up as a topic. I mean, you have the Nebos, and then you have some fixed arrays on there, like they're bouncing like radar waves off the ionosphere or whatever, and come down in areas, so they can't really like target stuff, but they can tell us like, hey, there's planes up or whatever. So it's really good for early warning. Shit for targeting, of course, but it gives you some decent information that something is coming, so they at least tell when planes are taking off and that kind of thing. I mean, it's a full-sized array I've heard has pretty impressive ranges on there. So I mean, it's definitely a great asset to go over or take out. Excuse me. But yeah, it's kind of like spooky radar math that goes into that stuff, which I wish Gunny was here. I mean, you probably know all about that stuff, but yeah, it's a good target set to go after. I believe they have some, at least the facilities have some roles in like ballistic missile detection as well. Although, of course, the Russians have satellites for that too, so probably a bit redundant at this point. But in terms of like fixing any of that stuff, especially with facilities, I mean, some of these like Soviet era mega structures and projects or whatever, I don't think the Russians have any real capacity to do it. I mean, they're spending like 40% of their budget on defense now, and the ruble is worth less than a penny now. So, they're having to bring in North Koreans now to help fight the war. I mean, I don't really think they have a lot of capacity. to fix some of this stuff. But I mean, they have certainly mobilized their economy to the extent that they have one, and we're still, I don't know, worried about escalation management to an extent, which just blows my mind, which isn't really an air power thing, but yeah.
All right, thank you for that. Pickled, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Forrest. Really appreciate the space as always. Sir Shaggy, thank you for co-hosting. I really enjoyed the conversations, and I do have a couple of questions, but also a quick statement, if I may. I know earlier you were talking about some of the ways to sort of pressure political leaders and all that stuff. Somebody was asking for a copy, maybe of a letter, a message. I definitely welcome people to check out open letter that I started for Let Ukraine Strike Back. It's pinned to my profile if anybody wants to sign it to support and use the copy of it. It's posted on Maple TV. A link is in my profile. But I have a question related to airframes or air kind of ammunition. On October 16, Anthony Blinken made a press statement announcing another $425 million worth of aid that's going to be delivered to Ukraine. There's a very general list of various types of ammunition and equipment that Ukraine is getting. One of them was air-to-ground munitions. If you have any idea, I was hoping maybe some of the experts in this panel, Len, Primus, anybody else, would be able to shed a little bit of light. If you guys already talked about this, I apologize. I just tuned in recently to listen to you guys, but I would definitely appreciate that take. Thanks.
Go ahead, Len.
Reference to air to ground, I took that as being, as I recall, and maybe Primus knows, I took that as being related to provision of JSOW. The one statement that Secretary Austin made that I know caught my attention, and I can't remember if it was a part of that specific one, Pickled, but it was around that same time, was when he announced that, and it was very specific, slightly odd, different announcement that the United States was going to be working, or is working, with Ukraine on a replacement for the R-27 Beyond Visual Range air-to-air missile. That was really interesting to me, because just as it would be in the Ukrainians' interest to develop an air-launched or extended range Neptune that they could target as they see fit, and then maybe that was part of what he was referring to as well. But in addition to that, their own longer range than they have now, air-to-air missile, and preferably with fire and forget capability, would really be something that the Ukrainians would want to get a hold of. And let's remember that the Ukrainians have an air-to-air missile industry. They had it before 2022. They were producing even for export. I believe India was lining up just before the full-scale invasion to buy Soviet-era missiles from Ukraine. So are they working on something that is similar to R-27, incorporating Western technology? That would be something that would be very interesting. Now, that would also require an upgrade to the existing radars on Ukrainian fighters, the Soviet legacy fighters anyways, or some way of using a data link for targeting. But that was a very interesting statement by Secretary Austin, and I'm watching very closely to see where that goes.
Primus, go ahead.
Yeah, a couple things. So the air-to-ground munition that is being provided, at least openly provided, it looks like it's going to be JSOW, so Joint Standoff Weapon, which is a American glide bomb. I think it's only like a 500-pound warhead or whatever, but it can go like 70 kilometers or some sort of pretty impressive range, but it's not powered. It still has a decent range even if launched from like a low altitude, probably about 10-15 miles. So very useful. You can see how useful the Russian glide bombs have been, but this will actually hit its target. So, that's going to be a good capability. But I think it was also kind of a compromise between, well, we're not going to give the Ukrainians JASM, but we'll give them JSOW, which I think is just give them the damn JASMs at this point. Good grief. I don't know what we're so afraid of. We have literally thousands of them. And a lot of the early models were both retiring, and someone's got a hot mic. We're retiring the earlier model ones because we're doing extended range JASMs and that kind of thing. But it's a stealthy, cruise missile system, which I would expect if we're supporting Ukraine in 2025, which I hate to even think about that prospect. I would think by 2025 they'll probably get it, but not now for whatever reason. In regards to the R-27 replacement, I hadn't heard that before, but I don't think it's going to be anything particularly sexy. I think they're going to kind of do what they did with the Frankensams kind of situation, where they put Sea Sparrows on a buck launcher. So I would think they might just do something like try to tune the radar or the brains in a Sparrow so it can see whatever painted by a fulcrum or a flanker, and maybe just use up some of the literally thousands of Sparrows we have sitting in storage. Yeah, because I think that would be the easiest replacement for an Alamo rather than doing a whole new missile. So that's kind of what I think they might be doing, just kind of give them some inventory depth. But I would love to be pleasantly surprised by that, because they certainly need something longer range than an Alamo, especially the early model, Soviet era ones that the Ukrainians have. So it's just not fit for air-to-air combat at this point. So, and to specify why, they have, okay, what a Sparrow is versus an AMRAAM. People are probably wondering, like, what the hell? I like to try to break this down a little bit. It's a semi-active radar homing missile. So what that means is you have to have the nose pointed, or at least the radar dish pointed. You can kind of fly a bit off center on that. And they have to paint the target all the way, and the radar just basically is looking for whatever the flashlight is hitting, and then it'll go hit it. And, it works, but you really have to commit the plane to the attack. And it's a lot like playing chicken, with someone else who's shooting at you. The advantage of things like AMRAAM or late model Alamos or the A-12s that the Russians have now, is you can fire it, and then you can just, pretty much, not immediately, but, longer ranges, but you can no longer be committed to the attack. You can maneuver after launching the missile, where you can't really with something like a Sparrow. So it's a good missile for like shooting down drones, and I think that would be the best use for it at this point. And maybe that's what they're going for, because I'm sure they're pretty much shooting down drones and cruise missiles. So, they're not going after Russian fighters at this point. So, so I think it'd be good inventory depth for them. Anyways, thanks.
Thank you, Primus. We've got a couple more hands, but if you want, 5, 10, 20 more minutes of the Flying Tigers segment, the payment is that you have to go right now to our profile, make sure that you have liked our page and followed it. If you want to hit the notifications bell, that would be great. And follow these guys, these gentlemen who have been up with us. ZGoalman and HopC aren't currently up, but give them a follow as well. So next up we have Michael.
Hello, everybody. I'm a big fan of Big Safari Boys. Thank you.
Thank you for coming up. Did you have more, or are you just telling us you're a big fan?
Yeah, I'm only fan, and they are really kind people. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much for the kind words. Go ahead, Carrie.
Hi guys, lovely to see you all here. Just a very quick thing, Shaggy. I was having a look at Rebecca's Amazon wish list, and I was wondering, I was sort of trying to see where, how you could get it to her. Is there because you can change the address and so on. But I just wanted to have some advice on how I could get it to her quickly.
I will have Shaggy reach out to you, or Cece, can you reach out to her in DMs if possible, if that's all right? Go ahead, Cece. Oh, she dropped on me, of course. All right, Latam, I had one other question that I was going to ask earlier, and Primus kind of just touched on the lack of air-to-air kills anymore. Do you foresee a time in the future when there are, say, 4 squadrons of F-16s that Ukraine goes on a more offensive and aggressive stance with trying to shoot down Russian planes? It probably means crossing the border, and at the very least, it's getting close to the border. Do you see that happening at all again in this war?
It'll happen if F-16s or other types are provided with the right combination of radar and beyond visual range missile. That's really what it comes down to. The Ukrainian pilots, I'm sure, will use that capability if it's given to them, but so far they don't have it. So the Russian advantage that prevents the Ukrainians from getting close to their combat air patrol and other aircraft with the Ukrainian fixed wing is going to continue for now.
Thank you. And Primus, you were talking the JASMs. It was maybe a month and a half ago. There was some talk that JASMs may be included, or is that believed to have been premature?
I mean, I think it's proved to be premature. I think at the time there was consideration for JASM, and the escalation management gurus and all the people that are kind of cringing at the thought of deep strikes against Russia nixed the idea of sending JASMs on there because of the potential ability of the missile to kick Russian ass, basically. Do we have a swear jar yet? We should get a swear jar. Anyways, that's why I think the sending the JSOWs instead was kind of a compromise. So it gives them a standoff capability, but it's more of a tactical standoff capability. It's not really something that they can use to go after deep targets. Because a JASM is a newer, more capable version of Storm Shadow. It's a really high-end, very capable cruise missile, probably our best, although I suppose the Navy would disagree. But it's a very capable system, and I just don't think they're willing to provide it yet because they might be worried about some of the capabilities maybe getting out to the Chinese. So I think there's a security consideration to that, even if they're sending the old A models. But I really think it's just the escalation managers who aren't supporting deep strikes into Russia, figured that they don't want to provide it and Ukraine doesn't need it. But, JSOW is kind of a nice door prize. Now, could we have provided that system, I don't know, months ago, at the same time we provided JDAMs? Yes, absolutely. I see no reason why they couldn't, especially if you can already hang JDAMs off of the French hammer bombs off of Soviet planes. It's basically a GPS guided glide bomb, as opposed to a GPS guided gravity bomb. It has some winglets so it can kind of maneuver a bit. So yeah, I think JSOW was kind of a door prize, but I mean it's a hell of a capable system because it has a unitary warhead, it has cluster. It's I would say fairly low observable looking at it, but I've never I have no idea what the actual RCS of the thing is, but it's useful. Maybe they'll even go so far as once they send to Ukraine, the Navy was looking at the ability of strapping a rocket motor to the back or underneath of a JSOW to give it some extra range. And I wouldn't be surprised if maybe they dusted off some of those plans and did that, because that's what they did with the it's more complicated than that, but the old AGM 130s, which is a 2,000-pound TV guided bomb, and they figured, well, this is cool. What if we strapped a rocket to it? And then it gave them a nice standoff capability with a otherwise short range weapon. So I see no reason why they can't theoretically do that, since I think they have working plans for it. They just never actually Navy never actually paid for it, and the Air Force is like, why do we need that when we have several other things? So would have been really nice if they built some of those and had them in inventory. They'd be very useful right now.
Absolutely. Latam, you want to come back in on that?
Well, Primus's comments about JSOW reminded me about another important thing to watch for on the Ukrainian side, which is the development of their glide bomb. And I don't know if that had been discussed earlier because I had to step down. Had it been, Forrest, or we can just touch on that briefly?
We didn't touch on Ukrainian glide bombs at all, no. I don't believe so.
Okay. No, that's an important one to keep an eye on, right? Because they showed us some really interesting images of this weapon apparently under development and what looked like a pretty advanced stage of development under the wing of one of their Su-24s. And I think we can keep an eye on evidence of claims of that weapon being used in the battlefield, because that is something that they could really use to put the Russians under a lot of pressure. I suspect that it's taking longer the Russians put their systems, their glide bomb systems together pretty quick. I suspect the Ukrainians are doing a little more thorough development on it in terms of the safe release from the aircraft and the operation of the weapon itself. So keep an eye out for that one, because they seem pretty serious about it. And if they can scale it up, it's going to give them a lot of firepower, just as it's given the Russians on the front line.
Primus, you had kind of popped in there for a second. Did you want to respond?
Yeah, I'm glad I brought this up. Crazy. I thought of something under a Su-24's wing, and I didn't know what it was. Because that launched Neptune, but it just didn't seem right to me. Ukrainians working on their own glide bomb. Yeah, that sounds very good. I think that's exactly a capability that they need. So how best to put it? I mean, yeah, the Russians put together. Well, that's because I am a robot. But yeah,
you're
anyways,
better now.
Ukrainian
You're
glide bomb
better now.
Okay. Yeah, I think the Russians had some planning and development on glide bombs coming into the war, even if they hadn't really fielded the capability, which might explain why they're able to do it so quickly. It's because they've been working on it for a bit. But all they really did is kind of put wings and a guidance package on, a bomb, which sounds simple, but it's very much not. But even the ones that the Russians are using are not very accurate. If the Ukrainians are taking the time, then I expect it's going to be a much better system, and it's probably not going to use Fab as a base for it, simply because the Fabs, the Russian iron bombs, are more of a high drag bomb casing. So as opposed to like the Mark 80 series, which are, slicks, they're more of an aerodynamic. So I think they're just a better option for a glide bomb package. So hopefully they're just taking dumb bombs from NATO and turning around and maybe putting a glide package on it to give them some standoff capability. Yeah, I mean, it gives the Ukrainian Air Force something to do, certainly, and gives them more of a role in standoff close air support. Because I think in a lot of ways, what we used to consider close air support, I mean, you could make a case that it's really been dead since the 80s. But now I think this war is kind of illustrating just, unfortunately, how outdated that concept is, especially if you don't want to take high risk with your airplanes. Yeah, I mean, there's a reason things like the A-10, are packing a lot of standoff weapons now. Be it like small diameter bomb or those kinds of things. Which a small diameter bomb is I think the Ukrainians have that as well. Correct me if I'm wrong, Latin, but that's a 250-pound class bomb. But if you can literally put it on someone's forehead or put it through a window or whatever, that's more than enough if you hit exactly what you're aiming for. And they're plentiful. We have a lot of those. I'm really hoping the ground-launched small diameter bomb situation, there were some problems with the guidance on that. I would think at some point, if we're willing to throw the money at it, we can fix it and make that a much more useful capability. Because I don't think small diameter bomb was designed for a high threat environment initially, which it very much is operating in now. So good we learned that now instead of later. So in a lot of ways, I think this war has really prepared us for confronting the Chinese in the future, because we're seeing what works and doesn't work, and we have kind of a heads up on what we need to fix now. So in that sense, I mean, I hate to look at it as this war was helpful, because it's profoundly not, but it has informed the U.S. defense industry, what needs to be, NATO really is what needs to be fixed and what needs to be invested more in. So, yeah.
Do you think those warnings and those cues to America and the rest of the democracies of the world are being heeded? I tend to be a little pessimistic that that's happening.
Yeah, I mean, politically on some levels, no. I think the inertia of just pretending there isn't a problem is still is still basically on people's mind. They figure it's like, well, maybe this problem will go away, or we can limit it, or whatever. Lockheed Martin has a very different perspective on it. Raytheon or MBDA or whatever, they're looking at this and figuring out how do we improve our product and make a case for selling more of it to, countries around the world. So, I think they're taking it very seriously, even down to the drones and so on, because, talk about AI needing input, right? In a lot of ways, especially for development of drones, Ukraine has been the best battle lab imaginable for it. Hate to put it that way, but it's part of the calculation. And they're collecting so much data on drone warfare is going to make kind of the next generation, or even some of the current generation of drones and being AI enabled. They're going to have so much more data to work with to train these AIs to then put into drones so they can operate autonomously. So, you can't jam an AI drone, right? It doesn't care if it can't communicate with home base because it's got a digital reptile brain of its own. And if it has thousands of drone engagements in its little microchip brain, it's going to be very effective. 5-10 years from now, you're going to have drone swarms that you can probably unleash on a company level, which will just rip up a trench line of enemies and just hunt down individual guys and do all kinds of horrible things. That's in the foreseeable future. And I don't. Yeah, this war is bad. The next one is going to be a lot worse with drone warfare if there isn't a counter to that, which I don't think there can be.
Yeah. I follow a guy on YouTube. His name's Alex Hollings, Sandbox News, and he covers a lot of air aviation themed topics. I'll put a link in the purple pill here in a moment. But his latest long form video was about remotely piloted helicopters from Bell, all the three big helicopter manufacturers, and they could just put in an input and the plane's going to go, or the helicopter will do it. So if that input's already in there, the jamming capability, it can't unless it fries the internal computer with, some kind of crazy system. It's going to just take off and do its thing. So it's a pretty crazy level of engineering and coding and all those things right now. I think Lexi.
No, just one thing I wanted.
Go ahead.
Just one thing I wanted to add to that is, within the next 5 or 10 years, you're going to literally be able to tell a drone, okay, go to this grid square, or a cloud of drones, go to this grid square, and just basically kill everything that moves on there. And you'll have drone like $1,000 a piece or something like that, shot out of there. They're just going to hunt and do their own thing. There's really nothing you can do about that, except maybe counter it with your own drone swarm. It's as bad as this war is, a real peer on peer kind of conflict with like the tens of thousands of drones that the Chinese are producing or whatever is freaking terrifying. And that's the future. So let's all pray for peace.
Absolutely. Or deterrence. A little bit of that too. Lexi, go ahead.
Well, yeah, talking about deterrence, so I'm going just back to a more general level, but I had spoken about this once before, but it was a different time. And I don't know if people here were on at the same time, but I just wanted to say, like, talk about how not to do deterrence. It came out in the past week. In one of the interviews Bob Woodward did on his book War, and we heard a lot of clips early on, but since it's been released, he did an interview. It was one with the Bulwark, but in there he talks about how in late 2022, I guess after, like when the Russians were getting real shaky after the Kharkiv offensive, or that, and them cutting off Kherson also, right bank. Anyway, when the Americans started to feel that Russia was getting more itchy with the trigger finger on the bomb, and we know that. Well, according to Woodward, he got the readout, or what he calls the verbatim, from conversation between Lloyd Austin, and Shoigu. And that's the famous conversation in which he tells them that you don't use a bomb, that it would change the world, that all your friends would come out against you. We heard something about that. He did other interviews, but in this particular one, he says that, among other things, because then Shoigu comes back and says, I'm not accustomed to being threatened. And Austin says to him, well, I'm in charge of the biggest war machine or military machine the world has ever known. I don't issue threats. I don't threaten. But
It was
anyway,
a
that's all
cold line.
it's pretty cool. But within this discussion, because Woodard wants to tell him that he's really got the whole verbatim, these says, and so apparently Austin says to him, we have, we're helping the Ukrainians. We've given them certain armaments, and we've put restrictions on just how and where they can use them. So you start farting around with nuclear things, and we got no reason to put these restrictions, i.e., this thing, including this nuclear threat and this don't do it, and don't do it because we've got the biggest military machine the world has ever known. In addition, he has to do a quid pro quo about we're holding back the Ukrainians. And so and we heard rumors about this. You remember when we were all scratching our heads like months and months ago saying, why won't the Americans go further, give Ukraine, take all the holds off? And one of the rumors was, well, there's some idea that they gave the Russians a guarantee that Ukrainians wouldn't be allowed to do certain things as long as the Russians stayed away from nuclear. And we dismissed that as like totally stupid. They're just not on the same level, right? The two,
Lexicon.
just tell.
I'm gonna interrupt you here real quick. Just, do you have a aviation themes
Well, it's
question here?
because what we've been
Latin
talking
only
about,
has a few
using
more
the
minutes.
planes over the line and things like this into Russian territory. And so I just wanted, I don't know if these particular if people on this time slot have heard that conversation, but I want to say that it sounds like the US has given a guarantee. And if they gave it with long range precision missiles, it sounds to me like it's also with, at that time that they weren't even going to allow any F-16s, but it sounds like great, nothing shoots anything over the line. So it's a point. I don't know if they've heard about it. I don't know if if guys have an idea what difference it would make, but I just want to express as well my view of such the distaste with which I view this kind of a quid pro quo, a guarantee that really was uncalled for and shabby. Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead, Latin.
Now, Lexicon, you bring up a really good point because, first of all, I agree that Secretary Austin's comment was totally awesome. But as far as the ability to hit Russian aircraft over Russian territory, for example, which seems to be, from what I can tell right now, that does seem to be a sticking point. Everything to me indicates that, because the F-16s are arriving, but they don't appear to be arriving with the kind of radar and missile upgrade that would allow them to do that. Now, that doesn't mean that all of them won't have that. Maybe a later batch might. Maybe the Ukrainian. Anyways, there's a number of possibilities, but from what we've seen so far, they don't have that capability. And this was one of the things that Ukrainian pilots were telling us in 2022. That's one of the reasons they wanted F-16 was because of that off-the-shelf, relatively easy ability to upgrade. If it hasn't happened, and it is the U.S. that would have to orchestrate that, because the European MLU program, the aircraft that the Ukrainians are currently receiving, that was the extent of F-16 modernization in most of NATO. Further upgrades, the kind that the Ukrainian pilots, I know for a fact, because I had a few exchanges with Juice back in the day when he was still with us, may he rest in peace. We were speaking about specific systems, specific radars and missile system combined that would give them those capabilities. That is the U.S. that would have to green light, and in fact, it's American firms that would be doing that work. So if it hasn't happened yet, it's either because it simply hasn't happened yet, but will, or, and I'm leaning towards that one, the latter scenario, which is that it seems to be a red line that maybe this administration is not comfortable with. The idea of Ukrainian aircraft shooting down Russian aircraft over Russian territory, which, by the way, with these kind of upgrades, they would be able to easily do without entering Ukrainian or anywhere near the border. They would be able to do it from very far back. So that's the only conclusion I can come to, is that somebody in Washington has made the determination that, I hope I'm wrong, and maybe they have made the decision to allow this, and the Ukrainian, but as I've said before, if the presence of that type of upgrade to their F-16s would be reflected in increased Russian aircraft losses. We did have that report earlier this week, and we have to be very careful with this one. I don't know if it came up in the conversation earlier, and that was the reported loss of a Russian Su-34, and that one seems pretty solid, that there was a loss of an Su-34. Some slightly more hysterical Russian sources on social media were saying it was an F-16. The Ukrainians have not claimed it, to my knowledge. There was nobody else saying that. So for now, I'm assuming it was any number of other scenarios that may not have involved an F-16. But here's what I know: if the Ukrainians did have that capability with at least some of their F-16s, we would be seeing a sustained loss rate among something that would look like what the Russians, when the Russians were losing a lot of Su-34s earlier this year, because that is a priority target for the Ukrainians. But we're not seeing it right now.
Thank you, Latin. Yeah, I did see a couple conflicting reports about that Su-34, so not entirely certain what that ended up, because Ukrainians were pretty quiet about it. Let's go to Mark.
Yeah. Hey, Forrest. Hi, Shaggy. Thanks for hosting the space. It's been really informative. And I just want to give a hats off to Lexicon. Well, man, I just love listening to Lexicon. Every time she speaks, I learn something new. So thank you for your contributions, Lexicon. Um, I have a question that I think Latin may have just answered, but I'm not sure. It's been nagging at me for months now, and this is in regards to the F-16s and the glide bombers. I was just kind of curious, what is stopping Ukraine from using the F-16s against the glide bombers? I know for them, the Russians to launch the glide bombs, they had to be within 40 kilometers of the aiming point. So presumably the planes launching would be over Ukrainian territory, not Russian territory, generally speaking. But is it the radar systems on the F-16s that are insufficient? Is it a political line that was drawn by the U.S. that prevents them, or is it the short range of the air-to-air missiles? I just don't know. I thought it would have been a no-brainer that, yep, this is the answer to glide bombs, but apparently not. I was wondering if anybody had any insights to that.
Latin, you want to take that?
Yeah, and it's something that we looked into in depth many times in the past, but it's okay to go over it again because it's a valid question. A lot of people that maybe don't follow it as closely are wondering, okay, some of them are in theater. Why are we not seeing the result that maybe were expected, at least by some? But it was always dependent on what level of upgrade the aircraft received. By the way, the standoff range of the glide bombs, I would definitely put it at more than 40 kilometers. And with some of the extended variants that the Russians are deploying, it could be more like 70, 80 kilometers. And as I understand it, they're doing most of these are being released from over Russian airspace. So the weapons loadout that the initial F-16s that arrived, that the Ukrainians showed us, that those aircraft were carrying an earlier variant of AMRAAMs, beyond visual range missile, which has a much shorter range, and Sidewinders, which are a short range heat-seeking missile. In order for there to be a significant increase in the ability of in the reach of the F-16s, you'd have to be looking at a later variant of AMRAAM, probably a late C or a D. And those are big questions, right? Because the D is the more modern variant of the AMRAAM, and the Americans, from the American point of view, although they are developing quite a few more advanced and longer range weapons for their aircraft, that the AMRAAM D is still very important for any scenario that might happen in another part of the world. So that's a problem. As far as the radar that would match the capability of that missile, the more advanced, more long range missiles, there's a couple of options that I think are probably the most likely. When I referenced earlier where the Americans would play a role in this, it would be either potentially using a later variant of the radar that the European F-16s have. That is the one that they have. Sorry, it's a little bit complicated. Bear with me, okay? But the American F-16 Sea Force is in the process of upgrading its radars. As a result of that, they have more advanced variants of a mechanically scanned radar that has significantly more range and could be, I think, from an engineering point of view, I can't tell you exactly, but anything can be done with money and time. But that seems to be one of the possibilities that I've heard of that would make sense. That they would retrofit those existing sets that they are replacing. They would replace the earlier radar that the European F-16s have. The other option, and I know that the Ukrainian pilots some of them definitely are fully aware of this. They've seen upgraded F-16s. They're in contact with the American F-16 community. Those links go back years. They know what they're talking about. They know what they need and want. But the ideal would be what is called the ANAPG-83. It's a electronically scanned radar. And this is the upgrade that American F-16s are going to. This really blows it out of the park. When you install that in an F-16, you're talking about 300 kilometer plus range, and very capable in other areas as well. There's no indication whatsoever, even so much as a rumor, that that's ever been on the table. But technically, it's feasible. And like I said, if the American government were to make a commitment to doing that, they could do it. It's an ongoing, fully engineered program. It would just be a matter of funding for it. So there's just no indication that either of those two upgrade options, which would significantly enhance the air-to-air capability of the European F-16s, there's no indication any of those have taken place from what we've seen.
Thank you for that detailed explanation. Yeah, it's incredible how one little kit can be added to a big dumb bomb and can cause so much havoc without enough repercussion from our end. Lat, do you have time for a couple more questions? Want to respect your time here.
Oh, I'm good. I'm just, yeah, I mean, assuming they're questions for me or whatever comments, it's up to you guys.
All right. I'm going to go to Edward and then CC, then Primus.
I'm hanging in there, Forrest, with what's left of the air wing with my little Cessna A37 Avatar. I'm what's left of the air wing for the moment.
Well, it's all good. You're doing well.
Thank you so much. And I'm afraid I missed the early part. I'm so excited the air wing is back. Thank you so much, guys. And thank you for going late. But so just on the last point, I was sort of hoping those Swedish AWACS with data link were going to like detect all those Russian planes and that therefore the F-16s might not need their radars upgraded. And the other question I had was about the Russian. I've been anxious about the at least the propagandized increasing size of these Russian glide bombs. You know, there's been a lot of uncertainty about whether they've really used like the 1,000-pound bombs or some bigger bomb or something like that. But I was interested to hear you earlier talking about the aerodynamics of carrying these huge bombs and stuff like that. And are these larger Russian bombs genuinely something to be worried about? And I hear you saying they're not very accurate anyway, they're bombs, but perhaps that's why they need bigger ones. I don't know, but are they using big bombs, and has it made any difference? Will it make any difference on the battlefield?
The Russian glide bombs are a very serious threat, and they started with 500 kilo. And 500 kilo that's a big weapon. And then they scaled it up to 1,500, and we have plenty of visual confirmation that they are regularly delivering the 1,500-pound weapon, it's a monster. I mean, they had said that they were going to go up to 3,000. They can't do that with their tactical aviation, so their smaller aircraft. That could only be delivered using their bombers, and that's complicated from their point of view. They'd be risking losing one of them, which they need to deliver cruise missiles. To my knowledge, they haven't delivered 3,000 kilo weapons yet. But the 1,500 kilos are big enough. I mean, that is a serious amount of ordnance. As far as accuracy, yeah, I suspect, and most of the analysis I've read is that there are big questions about exactly how accurate they are, but the way the Russians deploy them it doesn't really matter. Primarily, they're using this as a terror weapon against Ukrainian civilians, and as long as they're launching in the general direction of a block of flats, they seem to be satisfied with that, with the results they get from that. Sadly, so. The only questions appear to be over, to my point of view, is how are they able to really scale it up and beyond what we've seen so far? In other words, just being able to launch with 2 aircraft at a time, maybe a maximum of about 4 to 6 weapons in the 500 kilo category. Su-34 can only carry one 1,500 kilo weapon. So are they able to scale it beyond that? I have seen no evidence that they have. Because sadly, I hate to say this, but the evidence of that would be if a city like Kharkiv would be really on the edge, that they would be, you'd be seeing mass evacuations and a refugee crisis, a flow of people out of Kharkiv as it's just literally being bombed to the ground. That was the scenario that I was afraid of, and a lot of other people that I follow were afraid of earlier this year. That has thankfully not yet come to pass, notwithstanding the human suffering that these weapons have caused. But whether the Russians are able to scale that up, put it this way, if they're able to, they will. We know they will, right? I think most people listening here would agree that they would be willing to do that if they could. But for whatever some of the technical reasons we were discussing earlier when Hop was up, they appear not to have been able to yet. And hopefully that remains the case.
And just on the
and by the way,
just on the data link and the Swedish AWACS and all that for F-16s.
Yeah, the Saab platform is the big question there, and we don't need to have an answer to that, is at what stage of when they announced it, was that when they started training? Because if that's the case, remember, like I mentioned, for the Ukrainians, they're building up an airborne early warning and command capability from zero. They never operated such a platform, so there's going to be a learning curve there to get over. And if training started around the time that the Swedes announced this, that's going to take some time, because it is like as Hop was saying, it's a big task to train up a crew for that type of aircraft. So when they arrive will be anybody's guess. I'd be amazed if they arrived a year after the announcements. What would that be like? Probably early 2025. They will be high priority targets, very high priority targets. And I will mention, it's worth remembering that the Russian Combat Air Patrol, which continues active, every time you hear about Su-34s launching glide bombs, they are being covered by Su-35s flying with these interesting mixed loadouts that we've seen the Russians show us, which is usually a combination of air-to-air weaponry and at least one anti-radiation missile, which would be supposedly would be to suppress or destroy a Ukrainian ground-based air defense unit, a surface-to-air missile. That's a big problem for the Ukrainians. And one of the big problems is that, and it's been from the very beginning, is that the Russians have this missile called the R-37, which is a very long-range missile, 200 kilometers plus. I think the Russians claim 400 kilometers on it. It's probably a little less than that, but it is still something that the Ukrainian pilots take very seriously. It's why they constantly fly at very low level. And I forget who was it mentioned earlier, maybe Gunny or somebody else, very correctly, that when the Ukrainians start operating an AWACS platform, you have to fly those at least at medium altitude for them to be effective. And with the Saab radar that they have on that, you're again, take these numbers with a huge grain of salt, because it depends on a lot of factors. But you're looking at potentially about 300 to 400 kilometer reach on that AWACS platform. But the Russians do a lot of jamming as well, which could affect it. But yes, it would be a very high value target. It's not a fast moving aircraft. When you're flying in an AWACS configuration, you're not able to do a lot of evasive maneuvers. You have to fly pretty much in a set pattern. So would the Russians try to get at it? Yes, clearly they would. And the R-37 is a weapon that was designed exactly to take out high priority, larger targets like that, tankers, AEW platforms, that sort of thing. So yeah, I'm convinced they'll try to take it out. And that's another thing that complicates it for the Ukrainians. They'll have to develop some kind of tactics, some way of deploying it that will minimize that risk. As far as Link 16, yes, the aircraft itself is Link 16 compatible, or it has Link 16. The European F-16s have it. To what extent they're going to be able to use that, and to what extent the Ukrainians are trained up on it. Those are all the factors that'll play into how they use that eventually.
Thank you.
Thank you again, man. All right, Cece.
As far as targeting, this is why I'm so confused. A lot of assessments from offices that I've met with, and I believe Angry Ants too, independently, have been saying that there's not going to be any significant situational difference or status difference with striking inside Russia, and I don't understand how that could be true. Do you have any comment on this this repetition of this message that the risk didn't equal the return?
Cece, do you mean in terms of, are we talking about hitting ground targets in Russia, like air bases, or
ground, air to ground?
Yeah, which weapons like Storm Shadow would play a big role in if they get the green light for that. So what is it that they're arguing? I'm not clear on exactly what they're saying.
It wouldn't make that much of a difference in the outcome of the war.
Ukrainian lines in the air, in terms of the air war, we'd have to see. I mean, if you try to target the bases where the Su-34s, primarily Su-34s carrying glide bombs, are based, then you might have some luck in hitting those targets, in reducing their capability to deliver those weapons. But as I said, the Russians are moving their aircraft. I don't think they're doing full dispersal from dispersed sites, from highways, from that sort of thing, like Finnish, Swedish Air Force type operations. But they have a lot of airfields that they can play whack-a-mole with, and I think that's what they're doing. The Ukrainians are too. So there's no, the problem with on the pro-Ukrainian side, this is why so many of us try to constantly shoot down the idea of a game changer weapon. And we all cringe whenever we see an article or a post that either says that directly or suggests it, because then that gives ammunition to the pro-Russia people that you run into sometimes in American government, right? That because then it gives them the excuse that, well, if this weapon, providing the one weapon is not going to win it, and the Russians have too much superiority, etc. You know where that goes, right? So the hard truth of it is, as much as we would all want to believe that there are a laundry list of weapon systems that, if they were provided, would give the Ukrainians complete victory. That I personally don't think that's going to happen. Either way, it's going to be a hard fight. We have to provide them. There's a lot of things that can be provided. I would be fully in favor of the highest level of upgrade to F-16s would give the Ukrainian Air Force a real boost and would take a real bite out of the glide bomb threat. But that's going to require the commitment. My hope, because we haven't seen it yet. We've seen zero indication that the Americans are on board with anything like this. It's possible it's happening behind the scenes. We would see the results of that if they were deployed. But if we assume that nothing has happened there yet, that the Americans have only approved the provision of MLU standard F-16s, which can only be used really defensively over Ukrainian territory against glide bombs and cruise missiles, I really hope that if the Democrats win the election, that gives them enough, that they feel they have enough space politically then to be able to get behind something like an announcement that would look something like, okay, we're gonna put all of our resources on this, pull X number of F-16s out of storage, out of the desert, and put them through that regeneration process that is a thing that is done regularly for U.S. allies, and upgrade them to the latest USAF standard with ASA radar, and provide them with the latest AMRAAM-D variant. And basically, that would be, if they did that, they would be doing just about all they could right now to strengthen the Ukrainian Air Force, and it would have some real effect.
Absolutely. Go ahead, Cece.
I just had a follow-up. So for people who don't understand the role of the vice president, the reason this is so pertinent to what he just said is because you cannot announce that you'll have something different than what your current job is. You can't. So I have trust in Phil Gordon doing that because he's so great on Russia, even though on the Middle East, there's some things I disagree with. On Russia, he is so full throttle and not a Sullivan that I'm very excited. So for people that may think, well, that's not going to happen. She just said that she's in line with Biden. She has to. You cannot say, and that's the irony of running for VP. But anyway, my follow-up question was, with the retrofitting with the bells and whistles, what other countries besides us could do that? And I was under the impression that they got a bunch of juicy couture stuff for the F-16s, but they got nothing.
No, they didn't get anything that the Danish and Royal Netherlands Air Force, presumably the Norwegian, weren't already operating. They got some defensive systems that were noticed on the aircraft that were showcased in August. These were the integrated electronic warfare systems that were they're integrated into the weapons pylon, and that was one thing that people picked up on right away when we saw those F-16s in August. But again, no indication that they've had a radar upgrade or air-to-air missile upgrade. I will say that more recently we've had news that the latest variant of the Sidewinder has been provided to Ukraine, and that made me think, if the Americans are willing to provide the latest variant of their short-range missile, does that lean us towards the idea that maybe they'd be open to providing the latest variant of AMRAAM, which again is doesn't solve everything, but it improves significantly over what the Ukrainians have right now. Does a lot to close the gap between them and the Russian combat air patrol. So in answer to your question about the radar upgrade, the full avionics upgrade, as far as I know, if you're talking about APG 83, which is the ASA radar, that is an American program. I don't know of any other countries that are able to do it on their own. The Israelis do have some very interesting upgrades using their own technology, their own avionics on the F-16, and they offer those for export. But whether that's in play at all with Ukraine, I don't know. But that is another option that I've been saying that one for over 2 years.
Edward, go ahead. Sorry, sticky mic.
Hi. So I think you alluded earlier to the problem that the long-range AMRAAM, the AMRAAM-D, I think you said it was, may be in short supply in view of potential conflicts in the Pacific or something like that. Is there any hope that that could be remedied? Or if you would also, I think, mention that there were even longer range things in the works. Can production come up on those things?
Well, the longer range stuff like AIM 174, which is a real beast of a weapon that the U.S. Navy is deploying right now, there's no way those will end up in Ukraine. That's all cutting edge stuff that is really earmarked for any contingency in the Indo-Pacific. So Ukraine's best hope is probably an AMRAAM-D that still has significant limitations. As has been said countless times on this space, the air-to-air, and this was stated by the Royal United Services Institute about 2 years ago. It was October 2022 in their report that came out about the Ukraine air war, and they were the ones that identified that it is really the European Meteor missile that is ideal for Ukraine's particular circumstances. An AMRAAM-D would be useful teamed up with the F-16. The problem is that in the current environment, those F-16s still have to fly at low level because of the Russian surface-to-air missile threat and combat air patrol threat. The AMRAAM-D was not designed to be fired at low level, which means because it has a rocket motor, so you have that initial thrust, and then it begins to lose momentum if it's being launched from low level because it's making its way up. The Meteor doesn't have that problem because it's ramjet powered. But there's the AMRAAM, correction, the Meteor and F-16 have never been integrated. There's no F-16s that carry Meteor. I suppose they could be, but you would have to have a radar upgrade to really maximize or to realize the potential of that missile. Something like the American ASA radar upgrade would give you that. It would be a good match, assuming that integration could be done fairly quickly. But again, no indication that that's ongoing. And this is why I think Ukraine has been mentioning more recently renewed interest in Gripen, which is plug and play with Meteor. And more recently, they've also said that they're talking to their European partners about Eurofighter, which is a first, because that had been not discussed openly for a long time. But that's another area another aircraft where you have the potential to plug and play Meteor. I am convinced that they have probably discussed with the French the possibility of in the future, providing Rafale they would need help from their partners to finance that. But if they're getting, if Mirage 2000s are already in the pipeline, um, it's really a no-brainer that if that you look around the world, countries that have operated French equipment, upgrading to Rafale is very common. And the Ukrainian pilots know that this is another category. It's another aircraft in that category that would help them, not help, it would completely overcome that gap that they have with the Russians right now. So a lot of this is going to still be potentially 2 to 5 years out, but I think that's the direction they're going in. For the Ukrainians, I think they've definitely reached the point quite a while ago, probably during that gridlock in Congress, the U.S. Congress, is probably where they really realized that, notwithstanding their close connections to the U.S. Air Force and their fighter people who have experience with and understand the F-16 pretty well and its potential, I think a lot of them came to realize that that whole thing hangs on a thread, and with this coming election. Because, like I said, the election of Donald Trump would be catastrophic for the Ukrainian F-16 program, in my opinion. I think it would. There's no question about it.
And it's not just your opinion. It's everyone, every rep on both sides I meet with. Ask anybody. Ask Kinzinger. Ask any of the Republicans, except for all the MAGA ones, which is kind of everyone now. But except for the people like Lankford who are going for that. So that's not just your opinion. That just needed emphasis.
Thanks, Cece. Yes, I do want to make an announcement. I see 2 hands. We're a little bit over time at this point. I'm gonna do these last 2 hands and then close things down. Thank you so much, everyone, for being up, asking good questions for our experts. Thank you to our experts for doing what you do. It's been a lot of fun. We will do this again. I doubt we can manage one every week, but I'm thinking every couple weeks or at least once a month to get these up. So I believe I'm gonna go on honor system. I don't know if it was Booyah or just the Dutch guy first.
Let Dutch go.
All right.
Oh, thanks, Booyah. So yeah, interesting that our F-16s are ending up in Ukraine now. Finally, I mean, I know we were rejoicing back in the day when there was rumors about the Polish MiG-29s. Remember, guys? Those ended being they ended up putting those in boxes and pushing them to the border in parts, which is an interesting history on its own. And now here we are having Ukraine operate their first F-16s. These are MLU F-16s, which means that they have a midlife update because we basically flew the snot out of them. They got assembled in the 80s. The earliest ones got assembled in the 80s, early 80s. The last one, I think, got assembled by Fokker in 1992, I believe, if I'm right. But we made many specific alterations to these aircraft. One of the first optical alterations you see on our F-16s is the chute on the tail, which we actually really liked because we didn't want to thrust only on an arrestor hook when the brakes would fail or you would run out of runway. And talking about that, of course, we had the tragic loss of Moonfish. I think 1.5, 2 months ago during a night attack, and that is something we have had a very checkered past for the F-16s ourselves. When we started to fly those, we had many accidents. I mean, we lost a pilot every 2 or 3 months for the first 10 years of. I think at least first 8 years of operation of the F-16. So it's been a very steep learning curve. Imagine how steep it is for the Ukrainians to use an entirely new system. Another thing is, in light of the U.S. elections, we of course know that the coordination for help to Ukraine from NATO has been moved from Washington to Wiesbaden, Germany. That's a clear sign as well that Europe is invested in this, even though I'm pulling my hair out by the fact that at a 2 days drive from my house, we have now North Korean troops setting up. That's incredibly frustrating. It's a clear sign that the policies are not sufficient and are failing the appeasement and try not to trigger too many red lines that we put up ourselves. It's not working. So I really hope that that we get wiser on that front. Another thing is, a friend of mine actually was F-16 maintenance crew at the F-16, and it's very interesting because another thing is that you have the size of maintenance crews, which is different in certain countries. In the US, they have a guy for the landing gear, they have a guy for the hydraulics, they have a guy for the electronics. In the Netherlands, you have only like 3 or 4 people for the entire F-16. In Denmark, and you have one guy that is able to work on the entire F-16, 1 or 2 guys. So that's a whole different thing as well. I know that we put a lot of tooling onto transport as well. So a lot of engine girders and stuff you use to basically tinker to work on your F-16. A lot of that went to Ukraine as well. And to roll back to the start of my my talk is that many of these F-16s have been made on Schiphol airport in the maintenance hangar of Fokker by Fokker. It's a bit of a swan song for the company. It's the last fighter they were able to assemble with their own twist, which was a very good one. For Denmark, for Norway. So many of those F-16s, most of them got produced right in the Netherlands. So it's a bit of a proud moment as well. 2 weeks ago, we had the goodbye of the F-16 officially. So it's good to see that they are being put to use to keep my friends safe at night. So, all right, that was it. Booyah, go right ahead.
No, I'm going to actually hold for CC and for Latin. Let them close out the space.
I didn't have a question for Latin, so I'm going to go last.
Just wanted to mention to just the Dutch guy was mentioning that the European, the MLU upgrade, and one of the aspects of that that often doesn't get as much attention, but is important for Ukraine, is that in addition to the avionics upgrade and some of these defensive systems and electronic countermeasure systems that you saw integrated into their weapons pylons, those came from Denmark. There's also there was a structural life extension program as part of this. And I'm pretty sure that most of the European airframes didn't exceed, they like when they did that upgrade, it left plenty of airframe time for them to get them past, get them into F-35. So with the ones that they're giving to Ukraine, that SLEP, Structural Life Extension Program, is giving the Ukrainian aircraft quite a bit more life.
All right. Cece, do you have something quick?
Yeah, but it's not a question for Latin. I do want to thank Latin, though. This is just a wealth of information.
All right. With that, everyone.
I have an announcement, though.
Oh, well, that was what I was saying.
So Rebecca, our medic, lovely endearing medic friend, was almost killed in a tank with a dramatic hit. She's okay, thank God. But I just I'm gonna have a space raising money for her because she's so close to the front, always risking her life. So just hit the bell on my page if you want to see when it is. We're trying to schedule it right now, or else I would announce the time. She has an Amazon list, which makes it very precise and easy. And we love and adore her, and thank God she's still alive. So thanks, guys.
Thank you for that. I had not heard that, so that's upsetting. It always hits home when it's people that that's people that's connected to the space, that's people that are affiliated with our advocacy and our information. It's always nice knowing that they are okay, but it never stops being a weight in your mind somewhere, in a cloud, if you will. I remember my first time after I got connected with the former space, there was supposedly a mega air attack coming, and I had just become friends with Verlaine, and I did not sleep a wink that night. Didn't sleep at all. I was up, and then I got through, and the next day, and I'm thinking, these Ukrainians are doing this every single day, and I don't know. I am constantly impressed by everything that the Ukrainian people are, and that they need to get this over with, and we need to do our job to help them get this over with. So we hold spaces, we push advocacy, we push for what we think needs to be done. Thank you for being here and being a part of it. And I will hopefully get one of these scheduled again here as soon as we can. So, Slava Ukraini, friends.
Heroes Slava.
Heroes Slava.
Heroes Slava.
Thank you for joining us at Volya Radio. We look forward to seeing you again. Your audience. Your audience.